Hello, beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin for Semiagog, and this evening I'm going to be reviewing some backed up material that I've been looking at for a while related to um, the situation with Russia and Ukraine and the broader West. I will be looking a little bit at the battlefield situation and some maps. And I will also be looking at news related to countries in the surrounding region, um, countries that are important as regards all of this because they're formerly countries that were in the Soviet and before that Imperial Russian sphere of influence. They're ones that I have discussed in a previous stream. I think it was called Russia Resurgent. So I'm not going to be going over all of what I discussed there, but that provides useful background for what we're going to be looking at here. So be aware of that. It's not far back in the catalog. Let me see here. I can tell you, yeah, it is just a few back. Um, it's from June, late June, and it's called A Broader Russian Resurgence. So some of what I'm going to be talking about this evening is follow on from that. So yeah, a general review of the battlefield situation and the news, as you know, to whatever extent I understand it, because it's extremely difficult to make sense of any information coming from any side at this point, because it is a form of unrestricted warfare that we live under now, and so the battle is taking place on all fronts, including every form of media, from the smallest grassroots channels on Telegram all the way up to big Twitter accounts and, RT and Sputnik and the BBC and Associated Press. It's absolutely crazy now to try to get a sense of what's going on. You definitely have to read between the lines, and you have to take a look at uh, you know, contradictory narratives in order to find out what elements in their description of events are shared, and then, measure them against what the interests of the people writing these articles are in order to attempt to abstract, what's actually going on from behind the scenes. So, yeah, bear with me. There is actually a lot of ground to cover here. So let me do first my opening stuff. Please do follow this channel, Semiagog, as well as A Safer Space. You can do that on YouTube. There are two channels there. A Safer Space has lots of old content from a period where my other channel was under suspension. You can follow me on BitChute, both those channels. And then the core Semiagog stuff is over on Odyssey. There are many, many clips there that don't make it onto YouTube or that were removed from YouTube and remain only on Odyssey, some of them also on BitChute. Please follow me on Telegram, on Twitter, on Gab, and I even have a Minds account, though I haven't looked at it for quite some time. Buy my books. This is Vinculum. It's a science fiction novella set in 2076 in Istanbul, where a book thief, Alaric McBroom, is pursued by remorseless corporate hitmen, an esoteric sect of assassins, all to find a particular hermetic work, a book he's been tasked with obtaining. You can find this on Amazon. The link is in the description below. There's also my collection of poetry called Cinders from the Bloomery. Cinders from the Bloomery of Youth. This can be found on Amazon as well under the name Oliver Timken Perrin. Also, I should say that some of my peeps from Academic Agents Extended Crew have helped me in preparing for this. They deserve all of the credit and none of the blame, just like my channel supporters. Thank you to everyone who supports this channel, both financially and otherwise. That's why you get thanked in the opening credits. But the peeps from Academic Agents Crew have been helping me get ready for this. They deserve all of the credit and none of the blame. They don't necessarily agree with anything I've said here. They were just throwing the latest information at me and trying to help me get up to speed on the different takes that are out there. With that in mind, I should definitely recommend Prudentialist's channel. I recommend everybody go over there and subscribe to him. He's staying up on international affairs, global strategy, the great game, more so than I am at present. I recommend Apostolic Majesty's channel, Columba and Furious Pertinax appear over there all the time. It's indispensable information for the historical background by region. And I also want to recommend Charlemagne's Substack posts. I disagree with him, I think, a little bit about some stuff that he recently put in front of me. But if he hadn't put it in front of me, I would not have known about the take. I would never have heard of it. Charlemagne seems to be very solidly just trying to get to what's going on. I don't think he gives a shit in the sense of having a dog in the race in terms of preconceived notions and biases that make him ignore information. Right? He's constantly, as I see it, trying to find out what's out there and trying to revise his opinions and his outlook on the situation based on what he finds. So he's been putting out some articles on Substack recently, more frequently than he does on his channel. Please follow him on his channel as well. But yeah, definitely check out Charlemagne's stuff too. So that should cover the opening stuff. I think what I'm going to do here is move through material that I have pulled up, and I've got it arranged in a series of tabs. This isn't going to be an Ask Me Anything. Hopefully everyone who watches this will get, content that is consistently about what's in the title. So you know what you're going to get. If you stay here and watch, it's going to be on this subject. I'm not going to wind off in the way that I often do, with this or that discussion. So, please keep questions out of the chat that are not related to the topic. Any moderators in the house, if you're here, I haven't seen you yet, but thank you very much for being here. And please do make sure that all the discussion stays civil and YouTube compliant. So, allow me to light this cigarette and we'll get going with our tabs here. I think what I'm going to do is talk about the battlefield aspect first. This is an area where I'm certainly no expert, as Mercurius says over on the Duran. I'm not a military expert, but yeah, it does seem that it's possible to say some things and make some observations even without being an expert in this field. I had hoped to have a prudentialist and especially Jimmy Thomas on my channel here, because he's been doing some great work with maps and actually invaluable work with maps from an operational perspective, looking at this region. I still hope to get him on soon, and hopefully prudentialist as well, so that all of you can take advantage of the insights he offers by taking that operational perspective and looking at the situation literally on the ground via analysis of maps that he learned in staff college. But we'll hopefully get to that. So what you're going to hear from me as related to the military stuff is based on people who are pulling together and aggregating information coming from various sources, the Reba or whatever it's called, that journalistic collective, and which probably is related to the Russian military or intelligence services. I'm pulling some stuff from Mercurius, from the Duran, the Mercurius and the Duran. Those guys are relentlessly pro-Russian, over the top pro-Russian, though they do a good job of presenting it as unbiased. It is certainly not unbiased. However, recognizing that they're very pro-Russian does not mean they don't put out valuable information. And it is, in many respects, even though it is blatantly pro-Russian and relentlessly so, it's much better than the majority of the information that you'll get from Western media sources. So I keep track of it, and I keep up with it. Also, Military Summary Channel, that guy Dima or whatever his name is, seems to try to be more balanced in his takes on things even than the Duran. However, his channel is pro-Russian as well. The problem is that there are a lot of other ones. Like there's one, I think it's called Speak the Truth or something, I can't remember, which some former U.S. military guy who talks about it from a Western perspective, and there's just a lot of it is just crap. So much of the Western stuff is crap. So when I talk about, listening to the Duran and saying that they are very pro-Russian, it doesn't mean that they don't have good information. I check them out daily whenever I have time. Same with Military Summary Channel. It just has to be taken with a grain of salt. So like if you saw the recent stuff with Military Summary Channel, you'll see that there are some real issues around Liman or Krasny Liman. And he discusses them. Mercurius tends to kind of elide over all of that. And he talks about how all the offensive have failed, and that the front line is mostly quiet except for around Liman, and that doesn't seem to be the case at all. So we'll get into that now in just a moment. Last thing I want to say is I've just heard more and more and more about Orthodox solidarity in Greece with Russia, and watching some of AM's streams that are fairly recent. He's talking about Russian imperial support for the Greek national project from early on. I think that goes a long way towards explaining why the Duran takes the position it does. And if I'm not mistaken, I also heard Mercurius just saying that he knew one of the recent guests, some guy named Garland, via his appearances on Sputnik. So that's telling you he's a Russian media figure, Mercurius. And also, don't forget that the Duran shows the double-headed eagle. And while that has older roots, I think going back to Byzantium, it's certainly a Russian imperial symbol. Perhaps it's also something that goes with the Orthodox Church. I'm not sure, but all of that should be borne in mind. So let me see if I can get this up on screen without further ado. Okay, so you guys should be able to see the map here. Let me just get my cigarette lit. And we'll talk, to what extent I can say anything about this. It's not a great deal, but we'll talk a bit about what's going on here in Russia. Excuse me, in the Ukrainian battle space here, where Russia is butting heads with Ukraine. First off, everybody knows there's a big offensive up in Kharkov, and actually, let me get this window open. Can you guys see my cursor on here? I think you can. Just somebody in the chat let me know, because it'll be good to know whether or not this is appearing where it's supposed to, so I can kind of point to things here and just take a hit while I wait to see. Okay, yeah, thank you for letting me know. All right, so everybody knows up here in Kharkov that Russia was, depending on who you ask, pushed back ignominiously or pulled back prudently, probably a combination of both. I should say that there was discussion of heavy concentrations of armored troops that was being discussed here as likely leading to an imminent offensive on Ukraine's part in this region, that was being discussed a week or 2 weeks, probably 2 weeks at least, before this region was reclaimed by Ukraine. So that the idea that the Russians didn't know it was coming and were taken by surprise, it's flatly preposterous. I think it was a total mess for them in terms of PR. It was a shot in the arm for the Ukrainians. It likely did contribute, or is contributing to a willingness on the part of Western players and powers to continue to pour guns and treasure into this conflict. And my guess anyway is very significant numbers of foreign mercenaries. However, at the end of the day, as they like to say, I think this can be best understood as Russia getting a sense that there was going to be a massive Ukrainian offensive, and pulling back to areas that were going to be more defensible for them, to contract their exposure on their front lines, enabling them, at least in theory, to better concentrate their forces, not have them as spread out. However, well, we'll get to that in just a second. This is the general point that I want to make. Mercurius is always talking about how it seems like almost nothing's happening, and the Kherson offensive was a total failure, and there's not really a significant offensive except for these gains in Kharkiv, and Russia was going to pull out already, and all that kind of stuff. It seems to me, from what I'm hearing, there's a fairly sustained offensive going on along the entire front. Certainly the offensive continues, though it's not getting dramatic results, all in this area over here by Kherson, between Kherson and Mykolaiv. And there's a little salient up in here somewhere where they cross I think it's the Ingolets River, and they've maintained that salient. The Ukrainians have, you can argue that the Russians don't want to close it up. They want to let them flood in there and get shot, based on the idea that their military doctrine is to simply degrade the Ukrainian army. I think that there is some truth to that, but a salient like that is a problem. I mean, it forces you to have to stretch more men, the same number of men across a longer line. And likewise, there have been other, there's been pushing in this area by the Ukrainians that hasn't been entirely unsuccessful. They are gaining territory. So I think it's not realistic of somebody like Mercurius to say that, the steady grinding offensive in Donetsk continues, and day by day, city by city, village by village, Russia is making progress in Donetsk with a slow, steady grind, but similar incremental taking of territory in the Kherson region is characterized by Mercurius as, not happening at all. So now the apparently everybody's been waiting for some sort of offensive to occur in this area between in the northern parts of Russian held Zaporizhia, and then over here by look, whatever the hell the name of this little spot is. And this makes sense that Ukrainians would wish to cut this region so that they could stifle or interrupt the movement of men and material, resources, resupply, logistics, etc., across this region by Russia. So my guess is, though, nothing's moved there yet. We could see, everything that I'm saying right now could change quite a bit in hours. The other thing that I should mention that we should all be aware of is that we're essentially, how if you turn if you think about light coming from a distance in deep space where, whatever we're seeing is from, 10,000 years ago, it took that long for the light to reach our eyes. Or if you want to be a little less grand about it, you can talk about trying to adjust the hot water for your shower. You turn the knob and then you have to wait, 15, 20 seconds for the hot water to make it up to you. We've got a delay like that in everything that's being reported. There are a few examples of things that come in pretty much as they happen when it's something dramatic or it's suitable for a headline. But my sense is that whatever we see reflected in these maps here is 2 or 3 days out of date by the time we see it. So thinking about what's happening now as being represented by this map is dangerous, with a few exceptions here and there, again, when something rises up to the surface in terms of being newsworthy. But for the most part, I think everything we're seeing here is already at a delay of some days. Now, the area around Donetsk, it does appear that the Russians continue, or the Allied forces, as they like to say, the the Donbass Republic militias and Chechens and Wagner Group mercenaries and Russian regular forces in whatever proportions, they do seem to be making steady progress in important ways, but very, very slow. Attempting to, in particular, to get up in and around Bakhmut, to cut it off to the south. And they're at the point where they just now might be able to encircle some towns that will lead to at least some more significant or dramatic movement in that direction. So things look pretty good for Russia, all things considered, in Donetsk. Kherson, they seem to be just holding it. Now we get up to this northern front area, I guess, where you've got Krasny Liman, and you've got the Oskol River running up here. The first thing that's worth considering is that the Oskol River was supposed to be a point at which the Russians were going to, be able to dig in and more effectively put up resistance. And for some time, there's been at least one salient there where the Ukrainians got across the river and took a town, but now there are like 2 or 3. So things are looking rough for Russia along here. Now, I'm not saying that they can't eventually, pour some men into it and hold it. I tend to think that they will, but particularly around Krasny Liman, if you guys follow Military Summary Channel, you'll know about this. There's an encircling movement that's coming in here, sort of moving north and east to swing around Krasny Liman or Liman and encircle it. And there's considerable progress that's been made there. So apparently all this armor that had been concentrated here is getting used. They've punched through here and they've got the Ukrainians have a serious salient here. So that's the general picture of what's going on here, as I understand it. Apparently, there's some newly formed formations, military groupings. I can't remember what their size are. It's battalions or brigades or any of that. A considerable number of men were put together from militia drawn from these regions, and the best guess is that they've been deployed around here. We are given to understand that there's a fair number of actual Russian regular troops in the Kherson region. Up in and around here, I've heard many things said about it, but I'm not clear on it. The most general theme seems to be that this is mainly Donbass militia forces that are being increasingly that were always supported by Russian artillery and intelligence and logistics and air support, but now they're being it's very likely that Russian troops are pouring in here or will soon be pouring in with their partial mobilization. That's another thing. Hopefully everybody knows that. Apparently Russia is doing a partial mobilization of something like 300,000 men. I tend to think that most of them will be sent to the Ukraine, but it cannot be dismissed out of hand, this idea that they could also be calling up those men in anticipation of the opening of further fronts. We've seen excitement going on in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Armenia, to a considerable extent, backed by Russia. Azerbaijan, backed by Turkey and, by extension, presumably by NATO as well. We can't also forget that there was recent fun going on in Kazakhstan, and that's another place where things could get interesting. So I've got some notes now that I want to cover. So I've got my notepad as well. I've got other notes on screen, and I've got a ton of these tabs to go through. But first, I just want to make a few odds and ends observation. One of them is a twofold thing. It's about the so-called rainy season, and it's all going to be muddy in a week or two, and nobody will be able to do anything. And the other one is that everything will shut down for the winter. If I remember correctly, Charlemagne has, I believe, correctly pointed out a number of times that there's no reason to believe that the fighting will stop in the winter. I talked with Furious Pertinax, who has a very good background with World War II, and just out of curiosity asked him, did they stop fighting in World War II? And he gave just two examples just off the top of his head, because, as I said, he's good with this. Where did it go now? One is Operation Typhoon, also known as the Battle of Moscow, and that ran from October 1941 to January 1942. So, yeah, at the coldest points, it kind of wound down, but that was much further north. And we have an offensive that went through October, November, December, and into the first week of January without stopping. And another example that he provided was Operation Uranus, which was a Red Army operation, and it ran and that was a little bit later in World War II, from 1942 into 1943. It ran from November 19th of 1942 to February 2nd of 1943. So the idea that fighting will stop in the winter, I'm not saying it'll be easy. I'm not saying it won't be harder, but the idea that fighting's going to stop in the winter, I think, is exceedingly naive. And to a considerable extent, there's a lot of this kind of thing going on where everybody just there's a lot of repeat, right? Where a bunch of people uncritically listen to what gets said and they just repeat it because it's that day's talking point, and they have to repeat what other people are saying to sound like they know about what's going on. I'm not saying that I myself don't fall victim to that, because, as I said, to a considerable extent, not speaking Ukrainian or Russian, I have to rely on the kind of people who either put it into English or the people who aggregate that material into like daily reviews, like a military summary channel or the Duran. But it's at least worth taking an attitude of poking critically at what's being said by everyone and trying to find alternative takes. And I think Charlemagne does a very good job with that. Again, I recommend his Substack for that, particularly because you can just take it and read it pretty quickly without as much bandwidth hit of having to watch a video or whatever. So for people who are following a lot of stuff, Charlemagne's material is useful in that respect. There's another aspect here, which is the talk about all the stuff coming with the cold weather. With the transition, the fall transition to winter, where you supposedly have a whole bunch of rains. Now, this is the Rasputitsa, and the issue here is that it's really the spring that is the main time. Now, I'm not in the Ukraine. I do not have my boots on the ground, muddy or otherwise. So if anybody knows more about this, please let me know. It's entirely possible that I'm failing to understand this situation fully. But as best I can tell, the serious mud is in the spring. That there seems to be no question about. And we already know that this serious mud came in the spring already in earlier phases of this fighting. And everybody was talking about, oh, it's going to be terrible. Nobody's going to be able to do anything. And yet we saw the war continue to be prosecuted by both sides, advances and retreats made, and all the rest. So that's the worst version of this muddiness that comes with spring. And yet the war continued. There seems to be a general consensus from what I've read about that the fall is an issue as well, but not as much of an issue. So I went and I tried to dig just a little bit further again, just to push back a bit, or try to show some skepticism. So I took a look at like the Dnieper River. Now the Dnieper is of course just one river, but it's a major one running all the way down through this area off just to the west of where the fighting's happening, and indeed the fighting's happening actually around it in the southern areas. And it looks like they say under natural conditions, the Dnieper has high flows during the spring and fall, and low flows during the summer and winter. But dams have altered this regime so that the river now has pronounced high flows in spring, diminishing flows in summer, and low flows from September to March. So something could be done to raise the water levels if the Ukrainians wanted to play games with dams. We've seen that the Russians have played games with dams. The Ukrainians have played games with dams. That makes sense. But from what I can see, due to how things are dammed, you're seeing lower flows from September to March. So that's all this water that's supposedly going to be falling from the sky during the rainy season of fall, and yet the river levels stay low due to this damming regime. Now there is, so that's one thing to think about. If it's so overwhelmingly wet and everything, how is it that the Dnieper levels can be kept low just with the use of a few dams? Now, I haven't looked at other rivers and their levels, but this does suggest that we're not seeing across the board raising of water levels in these rivers and streams like we're being told. I'm not saying it's not going to be there, but I doubt it is as significant as everyone thinks. Another interesting point to bear in mind that's mentioned here is that the period of stable ice on open water begins in the upper Dnieper at the beginning of December, and in the lower Dnieper, even down there by Kherson, presumably, at the end of December. So it's plausible, it's conceivable that, depending on how cold the winter is, you could move infantry across the Dnieper. Now, I'm not there. You'd have to have somebody, who has experience from their childhood with whether or not they can go ice skate on it. They'll be able to tell you realistically whether or not that's plausible. But we are being told that in the north, you've got stable ice across the entire river, and it's a big river, starting in early December, and that by the end of December, you've got stable ice across the entire river, even in the south. And that has, in a situation where people are crossing on pontoon bridges and all the rest, the ability of infantry to cross quickly and quietly over frozen rivers, if not the Dnieper, certainly smaller ones, will probably have some bearing on how things go, how the fighting along these fronts develops in future. And then I don't have it up on here, but I also took a look at precipitation levels, because I kept hearing, oh, the rain's coming, who knows what's going to happen, the rain's coming, they're not going to be able to keep fighting like they thought they could. Precipitation levels, the ones that I could find in the Donbass, actually seem low in September relative to the rest of the year. So everybody keeps talking about, in just a week or two, Ukraine's not going to be able to do anything further because everybody's going to be bogged down in mud, and that's going to favor the Russians who are currently fighting defensively. I don't know. I think there will be some mud, not as much as spring is what it seems. And we saw that in spring, things continued. So all this talk about how, nobody's going to be able to do anything in just a week or two because it's going to be so muddy. I ain't buying it. Likewise, I'm not buying Alexander Mercouris's idea that Western tanks can't operate in mud because they're so much heavier. I don't buy that. I'm not saying tracked vehicles don't have problems in mud. Of course they do. And his points about how Western tanks that are larger and heavier probably require more in terms of logistics. Certainly, fuel would be a part of that. I tend to believe it, but yeah, there just seems to be some highly dubious shit being slung around in terms of what we're supposed to expect, what's supposed to be happening. Now, another thing I want to, well, you know what? Let me go with all of this at the end. Basically, Charlemagne posted a very interesting YouTube clip that is an American of Ukrainian descent who speaks both Ukrainian and Russian, and he has some things to say that are interesting. And then he, in turn, relies on some information coming out, presumably at a grassroots level from Ukraine, that he has translated into English. I think I'm going to touch on that at the end. So don't let me forget. Let's jump over to what's going on in the surrounding regions. This, again, is what's tying into the previous clip I had done about a resurgent Russia, where I talked about, as we're going to do now again, I talked about the situation in formerly Russian-controlled territories that are of strategic significance in terms of NATO's eastward expansion that Russia finds threatening, and also significant, more specifically for the war in Ukraine, the Black Sea situation. My belief that a lot of this has to do with Black Sea energy reserves that, if they came online, could further erode Russia's leverage with Europe vis-a-vis energy. But let's take a look here. Let's get this up on screen. There we go. Okay, so let's start off here with that's not the one I wanted to start. I didn't have all my tabs put together perfectly. Okay, here's one I just wanted to cover just generally. We've got talk. This is from just a few days back, less than a week. Ukraine, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Moldova will create a free trade zone. This seems to be an attempt to get some things going to support these countries that were formerly within the Russian sphere of influence. Some of them aren't going to be able to get into NATO as quickly as they want to get them in. As we'll see, they are desperate. NATO is desperate to get Moldova in very quickly. They've got concerns about Transnistria. They're toying with the idea of opening up another front. We'll get to that in a minute. But here, we just see this idea of a free trade zone. And I just wanted to point to this because this is one of the ways in which Western powers are attempting to support the creation, support integration of some of these former Soviet states in order to bring them together, to peel them off, presumably to some extent, from Russia, and to use that as a way to bring them into their orbit in cases where they cannot yet bring them fully into NATO. Georgia is one of these examples. Ukraine is one of the examples. Ukraine, they're trying to fast track it. Georgia, things have slowed down with that. But Moldova, they're moving very quickly to do something there. Okay, and here is an article. This is a very interesting one. I just want to read through this one because it gives us a general picture of what's going on right now. First thing I want to point out, this article, it's in the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which means we're definitely looking at a regime rag via which ideas about what could happen or should happen are floated beforehand for the policy wonks. But what I want to point to here is you can see that this guy who's writing the paper is called Vladimir Solovyov. Now, it says Vladimir Solovyov is a journalist with Kommersant newspaper. Now, I am no expert on which news outlets are associated with which points of view in Russia. So, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But If I just take a quick look over here at Commerçant to get a sense of what's going on, it says that it's it appears to be, a fairly liberal paper from what I can tell. It was founded by a businessman named Vladimir Yakovlev. However, it was then sold to some other guy, I believe, and ultimately, it after being moved, passed off like a baton, it ended up in the hands of one Alisher Usmanov. So the newspaper that this guy writes for right now, who the guy who wrote the article we're about to review, or the white paper, he writes for a newspaper that's owned by Usmanov. This guy Usmanov is consistently referred to as an oligarch with a very, very close relationship with Putin. So we've got Usmanov was named in the official journal of the European Union, the publication of record of the EU, as a, quote, pro-Kremlin oligarch with particularly close ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin. It added, Usmanov has been referred to as one of Vladimir Putin's favorite oligarchs. He is considered to be one of Russia's businessmen officials who were entrusted with servicing financial flows, but their positions depend upon the will of the president. So this guy who wrote the article I'm about to read, I just want everyone to understand that he writes for Commerçant, and Commerçant seems very much to be a pro-Kremlin mouthpiece run by a very, very pro-Kremlin guy. It's important to remember this as we read what we're about to read. So here is this Ukraine war risks repercussions for Transnistria. Excuse me. Destabilization in Moldova incited by Russia could prompt Kiev and its allies, Kiev, could prompt Kiev and its allies to deprive Moscow of all its levers of influence there once and for all by purging the self-proclaimed Transnistria Republic of Russia's military presence there. Now, let me just jump back here. Hopefully everybody knows this, but Transnistria is roughly right about over here, just past Odessa on the map. It's at the, it runs along the Danube, in the northern part of Moldova, which is in turn in the northern part of Romania, and it's been a breakaway enclave, so they say, since 1991, right? And it's got a small number of Russian troops, supposedly peacekeepers, and it's also got a major arms depot, and it's often been hypothesized, including by me, that Russia would move to block all of the Black Sea coastline to take Odessa and then connect with Transnistria, which would give it leverage in Moldova, which was historically part of, to some extent, was part of Bessarabia, which was an imperial Russian possession for a time. So my expectation is that would give Russia some control over the Danube. And for more on that, go look at my Resurgent Russia clip. But let's come back to this article. When Russia embarked on its war in Ukraine, one of its undeclared goals was shoring up its position in the breakaway Moldovan region of Transnistria. I'm sorry, it's on the Dniester River. And indeed in Moldova as a whole. Instead, the unrecognized republic has become one of the most vulnerable places on the map of what the Kremlin sees as the Russian world. Now Moscow runs the risk of losing its outpost on the Dniester River altogether. But you know what? I've got to look at something here. Moldova. I always forget what I memorized beforehand, but I need to get to, do they not have a good map of this? Hang on. Google Maps Moldova, because as I recall, it's not just the Dniester. Let's see what we got here. Let's jump in here. Right. So Transnistria, get the fuck out of my face. Transnistria runs up through here, as I remember correctly, and it's on the Dniester River. But there's another. That's right. Sorry. That's what I was thinking about, right? So if you look at Moldova, Transnistria is in the north. But if Russia can use Transnistria as a way to influence events in Moldova, it's done so in the past. It certainly could do so again. That's why Danube came to mind. Right down here at the very bottom of Moldova, there's a point at which it connects with the Danube. That's what I was misremembering. So this is on the Dniester. This is with the Danube. And there's one tiny little part of Moldova that touches the Danube, which is a very, very, very important river logistically. and not least for Russia, because it connects and gives them an overland waterway connection to Serbia. And it's a very important river. There's more on that in my Resurgent Russia clip. So anyway, I just wanted to check on that because I needed to get that information out there for you clearly, so that you understood about the importance of the Danube too. And if Russia can maintain control of Transnistria and use it to bring Moldova to heel, then it will also make them de facto controlling one of the riparian states, one of the states along the Danube River, which is also very important. Okay, so I continue with reading. For decades, a largely symbolic military presence of 1,500 Russian troops in Transnistria has strengthened Russia's position there. Those troops comprise two components: a peacekeeping contingent that has been there for 30 years, during which the conflict has remained frozen, parentheses, something Moscow has prided itself upon, end parentheses, and Russian troops left to guard a Soviet-era ammunition depot in the Transnistrian village of Kobazna, not far from the Ukrainian border. For many years, the Moldovan capital Chisinau has seen its government alternate between pro-Russian and pro-European forces. Moscow had hoped that one day it could use Transnistria to get all of Moldova back on its side by overseeing the return of the breakaway republic to Chisinau's control, on condition that it would have special status within the country. By reincorporating the pro-Russian region into Moldova, Moscow believed Transnistrian voters could tip the balance in its favor and ensure that the country was always led by a pro-Russian government instead of continuing to drift towards the west. This is why Moscow has never recognized Transnistria's independence. But now Moscow's invasion of Ukraine appears to have dashed any chances of Chisinau ever turning again towards Russia. I'm highly skeptical of this assertion, but I guess we'll get to see how it unfolds. What's a good way where you can see me and this? Okay. In June this year, Moldova was granted EU candidate status alongside Ukraine. Any future Moldovan government will be pro-European. To me, that seems like, who's offering the biggest carrots and who's offering the biggest stick. All this tells me is that the Western powers have upped the ante in terms of what sort of carrot they're offering. To continue, back in spring, when few could imagine that the Ukrainian armed forces would be able to stop the advance of Russian troops, never mind launch their own counterattack, it seems that once Ukraine was defeated, Transnistria and Moldova would be next. Russian Major General Rustam Minikayev even said publicly that Transnistria was one of the targets of Moscow's special military operation. At the time, it seemed entirely possible that Russia might take control of all of southern Ukraine, giving it a corridor right up to Moldova's borders. Today, following Russia's humiliating retreat from the Kharkov region, there is no longer any talk of Russian troops taking Odessa and reaching the Moldovan border. I wouldn't be so sure about that. To go on. Instead, the overall picture for Russia looks bleaker with every passing day. Even Russia's most fervent patriots do not deny that their country has been routed on the Ukrainian front. Ahead of President Vladimir Putin's announcement on September 21st of a partial mobilization, fresh blood to swell the ranks was being recruited in Russian prisons. Donetsk and Luhansk, whose salvation was one of the purported aims of the operation, are being shelled more heavily than before Russia's invasion, and local officials are being blown up in their offices. Yeah, that's essentially Ukrainian terrorism, but they don't go into that, allegedly, plausibly. To go on. In other areas where Russia also claims the role of a security guarantor, it's not much better. Azerbaijan and Armenia have resumed their war. Spoiler alert, they never really stopped. Fighting that Moscow had supposedly stopped in 2020. No, they didn't. Nobody thought they did. They're just there as peacekeepers, and it's been flaring up on and off constantly. More recently, another military conflict erupted between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, despite them both belonging to the Russia-led Collective Security Treaty Organization. These factors cannot fail to take their toll on Russia's authority and influence over its neighbors. Well, remember this stuff about Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Kazakhstan. We'll get to that when we get to the Collective Security Treaty Organization. But to go on. Amid Moscow's numerous diplomatic and military failings, Transnistria is becoming a tempting and relatively easy target for neighboring Ukraine. Kyiv's claims that its armed forces could easily take control of the self-proclaimed republic are more than just talk. Russian troops there serve side by side with local residents, Transnistrians who are Russian passport holders. For the latter, military service has more to do with earning a decent wage by local standards than it does with identity. This puts their willingness to fight in doubt, especially since it would be hard to send in reinforcements from Russia. I'm not so sure it'd be hard. Given the Russian army's failure to carve out a corridor through southern Ukraine, they could not make their way there overland, and flying them in would risk them being targeted by Ukraine's air defenses. Taking Transnistria would be a clear win for Kiev. Now, here we see that this guy appears to be agitating in the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace for the West to attack. And this is something of a policy paper by a journalist, but it seems to be a white paper reviewing the circumstances and recommending a course of action. Again, the guy who's proposing this writes for a newspaper that is owned by an oligarch who's said to be particularly close to Putin. So remember that as we read. I don't know what it means, but it could be interesting. So again, to continue, taking Transnistria would be a clear win for Kiev. For a start, it could restock its arsenal with weapons from Kobazna. In addition, it would be a resounding victory over Russia. Losing its outpost on the Dniester River would be far more shocking and painful for Moscow than its recent retreat from the Kharkov region. For now, Ukraine hasn't taken any concrete steps towards Transnistria. The most it has done is privately ask Moldova to open a second front against Russia in the breakaway region, which Chisinau declined to do. Although there are new sounds coming out of Chisinau from their figurehead female politician figure. You know, whenever the West starts to do things that are ugly to countries, it usually does so behind a female figurehead. Something that I think we should all bear in mind as being at least a possibility as regards Maloney. But let's stay focused on Ukraine. But there are signs that Russia is planning to stage a coup in Chisinau, which could provoke Kiev to take action. Despite being held under house arrest since May on treason and corruption charges, this is interesting information. I can't speak for all of how it's characterized, but there are details here that if anybody wanted to dig deeper will probably yield some fruit. They're good, search terms to go looking for what's actually happening. So this guy is paying attention to what's going on. I just have to wonder what his motivations are given for whom he writes. Anyway, despite being held under house arrest since May on treason and corruption charges, the Kremlin's longtime partner in Moldova, former President Igor Dodon, regularly calls for mass protests that could bring about a snap presidential election, something the Communist Party led by former President Vladimir Voronin would also like to see. The fugitive, a politician and businessman Ilan Shor, has gone one step further. Having fled abroad to avoid a jail sentence for a fraud conviction, he has organized an ongoing anti-government rally that began on September 18th in the center of Chisinau. With claims that 50,000 people will turn out, complete with tents and a stage for speeches, the protests should have all the trappings of a revolution. The factor Shor is relying on to bring people to the streets is the cost of Russian gas, which is currently an unprecedentedly, that's barbaric, which is currently at an unprecedented high of $1,800 per 1,000 cubic meters in Moldova, and has caused prices for pretty much everything in the impoverished country to rise. Shor, Dodon, Voronin, and their supporters argue that the country is facing the prospect of a very uncomfortable winter, and all because Moldova's pro-EU government, led by President Maia Sandu, has fallen out with its strategic partner Russia, and is neither willing nor able to reach an agreement with Moscow on an affordable gas price. If they were in charge, there would be no such problem, of course. So basically what he's saying is that the worsening economic situation is being exploited by Russia in order to bring Moldova to heel. And we're going to see this again in places like Bulgaria. I doubt it in Romania, given that it's now a central location for it's the base of NATO's Black Sea Operations Center. They're going to have a hell of a time. Russia's going to have a hell of a time peeling Romania away from the EU. But that means that it makes it all the more important for them to do something with Transnistria and Moldova in order to be able to wedge Romania in between theoretically a Moldova that has been brought into line and a Bulgaria that's increasingly been brought into line. But we'll get to that in a minute. Let's come back to this article. Russia has done its best to support such claims. A delegation of Moldovan deputies from the Shor Party, named after its leader, and the Communist Party visited Moscow on September 9th and met with Leonid Slutsky, head of the Duma's Foreign Affairs Committee. According to the Shore Party's press service, the topics of discussion included finding a solution to provide Moldova with gas at an affordable price. No sooner had the Moldovans departed than Slutsky sent an official letter to Shore inviting them to return to discuss a roadmap for solving existing problems. The signal was clear. Russia is prepared to compromise, but the current Moldovan government is not, and should therefore be traded in for one that is. The revolutionary scenario instigated by Shore is designed to bring about that regime change, but whether or not that is possible remains to be seen. The key question is how far Ukraine, Romania, and the West in general will be prepared to go to stop Chisinau falling back into Moscow's sphere of influence, especially while Russia remains at war with Ukraine. The answer is impossible to predict, but the fighting in Ukraine has certainly expanded what is possible. It's not such a huge leap from launching missile strikes against Russia's Belgorod region to entering a pro-Russian enclave 1,000 kilometers from Russia. There is every chance that destabilization in Moldova incited by Russia will prompt Kiev and its allies to deprive Moscow of all its levers of influence there once and for all by purging the self-proclaimed Transnistria Republic of Russia's military presence there. So what we can see here, I think fairly clearly, is this guy, Vladimir Solovyov, is agitating for NATO, Ukraine, and that whole group of powers to go in and take Transnistria. But again, he writes for Kommersant. Now, I want to add, there is an opposition in Russia. They are allowed to speak to a certain extent. They do get published. There are liberals. There are people who are against Putin. And it's possible that some of them could be stuck in there as token fill in the blanks, even in newspapers owned by people that are very, very close to Putin. But this doesn't seem like this. This seems like a push for the West to get active in Moldova in terms of taking Transnistria. I'm not sure what it means. I am not sure what it means. But Moldova is no doubt of considerable importance to Russia for all of this, again, because Transnistria will give them leverage on Moldova. Moldova will give them leverage on Romania. Moldova will also give them a tiny little strip of land that gives them access to the Danube River, which puts them in a better position to cut off its access where it opens up at the Black Sea. And there is also the Dniester River itself. The Dniester River is, of course, not as important as the Danube, which is a mighty river, possibly the most important in Europe in a number of respects, particularly given that through a canal system in Germany, you can go all the way from the Black Sea up the Danube through the canal locks, and I believe it's the Rhine and maybe the Metz rivers, can't remember. Go back to the Russia Resurgent clip, and I talk more about it. You can get all the way up and out to the North Sea. So, yeah. Keep an eye on Moldova. Let's look at a few more things about Moldova as we continue here. What else do we have next? Well, here, this is sort of related to, I'm going to look at this stuff in a block. Romania and Moldova together, I'm going to look at as a related block here. One is that Azerbaijan, which has gotten much more close with Turkey and is much more close, for example, with Israel, and has been working with Turkey to do things that embarrass and cause problems for Russia. Azerbaijan stands to gain quite a bit by providing gas to a number of these Eastern European countries that are trying to stay out of getting tangled up with Russia based on their energy needs. And so a lot of these countries are trying to get with Azerbaijan to do this. And I believe this probably has quite a bit to do with why we're seeing things break out with Azerbaijan and Armenia, because conflict there could make energy transfer more difficult, conceivably, or cut down the options that they have for doing it. But what's important is that here is that the Azerbaijani energy minister is telling Romania, look, we want to get you gas, but we have requests from a number of countries. You know, they say that they're doing everything in their power to get gas to Romania, but there are all kinds. Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Greece, and Turkey all want to get energy. Here's another interesting thing. One of the ways that energy gets from Azerbaijan to Europe, if I remember correctly, is by crossing Turkey. So you got to watch what's going on with Turkey. They seem to be playing both sides here, and it makes sense that they would, because if they play it wrong too much on one side or the other, they could crumble, or at least the regime in power there in Turkey could crumble, and then it's anybody's guess what would happen next. So Azerbaijan, you have to think about Turkey. Turkey, you have to understand that it's playing a double game, a pragmatic game, potentially a two-faced game. But I understand why they're doing it. And though I don't like Erdogan at all, the simple fact that he's survived this long and continues to stay afloat and just barely keep his country afloat is impressive, given the conflicting pressures it's under. But let's get to some other stuff here as related to Romania and Moldova. One is that Romania looks like it's going to buy Israel's Iron Dome defense system. Ha Oy vey. It seems as though this is, whatever's happening across the world, one thing you can be sure of is that the people, military industrial complex folks and the arms industries are making money hand over fist. All this shit, all this old ordnance and equipment that's being handed over to Ukraine creates these empty spaces in all these NATO countries, and they need to buy new stuff to refill it. So not only are they making money hand over fist now, it appears that they are going to be making this money for quite some time as the depleted stockpiles have to get refilled. I see Zed Dez is in the house, so we certainly have a moderator now. Welcome, Zed Dez, and thanks for coming in. And so as regards to stuff about buying the Iron Dome missile defense system, we can look at, and we will in just a moment, at what the details of the article are. But, I used to hear back in the day about how, warfare in the Middle Ages was basically like a playtime for the aristocrats, because they could get killed, but if they've got proper plate barding on their horses and they've got, good plate armor and all the rest, and they're surrounded by their personal guards and the rest, it's kind of fun. It gives them a chance to show off their chivalry. They're not in a real risk of being killed. If they do get caught, nobody's going to execute them because they want to make the money that comes with a ransom. So they're not really at risk. I think when we look at things like, Israel selling an Iron Dome defense system to Romania, when we look at, that means Israel's selling it to NATO, which means basically all the Americans watching, as well as the Europeans to a much lesser extent, we're paying for this. So it's not that Israel's selling it to Romania, it's that Israel's selling it to us, to NATO. And again, Romania is the head of the Black Sea operations for NATO, or it's the location of their headquarters, I should say. So yes, there is that dimension that we should think about. But as I said, thinking back about the Middle Ages and aristocrats getting involved in war, I'm not so sure that it's really different these days. The people in power are no longer aristocrats, but they don't even face the limited exposure to violence and danger that the aristocrats would have once upon a time. In the old days, protected by plate armor, for the most part, and their own personal guards, unless they wanted to get really valorous, they would not be at any particular risk. And so, a whole bunch of villains and serfs get chewed up and spit out, their blood waters the streams, their bones, fertilize the soil. No big deal. We needed to have some valor. We needed to have some war. These days, I think that in some respects, it could be considered the same kind of thing. They just need to throw a war. Throw a big war and see who comes. You can deplete the populations considerably, and I guarantee you that the militaries of the Russians and their allies and the Ukrainians and their allies, I guarantee you that they're not packed up to the rim with any ethnic group except one. And I think we're just seeing another thing where they're like, shit, we can make a crap load of money. We can, remove a population that clearly we view as being problematic. And everybody gets rich. What's not to like, I think there is still some of that attitude going on. And I think we're seeing it play out here. So Romania's defense minister visited Israel and says that Bucharest may, it's not certain, may buy Iron Dome anti-missile defense system and military drones from Israel. And that just means that the Israeli military-industrial complex, which is tied to the U.S. and NATO and Western ones in a way that I don't doubt is consistently very advantageous for that Israeli military-industrial complex. It looks like they're going to be inserting themselves here as well. What's another thing we can take a look at here? Here's a joint statement that came out just a couple days ago. What is today? Yesterday. This is on the U.S. and Romanian bilateral defense relationship. Now, before I read this, I realize I should say this. Not everyone has seen my Resurgent Russia clip. So to give you context for why I'm now looking at Moldova, Transnistria, Romania, Serbia, Georgia, and these countries is because that's what we have to look at in the wider region. That's what we have to pay attention to. It's not just what's going on the battlefield. It's what's going on in all these other countries. And I have a number of predictions I made, like that Bulgaria would shortly flip over to the Russians. Since I put that video up, it has. I'm not claiming some great prophetic ability. Almost anyone who knows anything about Russia, Bulgaria, and their relationships would have seen this. But this, just by way of context, why I'm reviewing Bulgaria, Moldova, Transnistria, Georgia, Romania, because these are Black Sea states or former Russian satellite states. And what they choose to do and how they choose to do it in future is going to determine whether or not Russia has any significant presence on the Black Sea. And don't forget, ever since the 1850s, with the innovative new approach of an amphibious landing with French and Ottoman and English troops, the Western powers have been very, very keen to keep Russia from being a power there. And I don't think the fundamental aspects of it have changed to this day. So that's why we're looking at these things. So again, this is a joint statement on the U.S.-Romanian bilateral defense relationship. On September 24th, 2022, U.S. Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Affairs Celeste Valander and Romanian State Secretary Simona Cojacaru met in Romania to discuss a range of bilateral defense and regional security issues. The two leaders recognized the 25th anniversary of the U.S.-Romania strategic partnership, shared views on Black Sea security, and lauded NATO's unified response against Russia's war of choice in Ukraine. I don't even know what that means. Both leaders noted Ukraine's recent battlefield successes in the Donbass region and condemned President Vladimir Putin's recent escalatory rhetoric. Assistant Secretary Valander reaffirmed the United States' Article 5 commitment to the eastern flank and thanked Romania for hosting a significant number of U.S. rotational forces. Both leaders also marked the historical significance of the NATO summit in Madrid and stressed the need for allies to continue investing in combat credible forces to defend the alliance and deter Russian aggression. Interesting choice of terms, investing in combat credible forces. Not their own necessarily. Mercenaries, maybe? Investing. I wonder whose money is being invested. My wallet feels a little bit flat, and 87,000 new IRS agents are apparently teed up to go to work. Must be a coincidence. While aboard a Romanian naval vessel on the Danube River. Note that, ladies and gentlemen, they decided to make statements while on the Danube River. You think they're aware of the fact that the Danube River is important, even though most commentators and people in the West don't pay attention to it? I bet you they do know that it's important. Weird. You know what's at the other end of the Danube there? Or along the Danube further west? Serbia. Interesting. We'll look at Serbia in a minute. While aboard a Romanian naval vessel on the Danube River, Assistant Secretary Valander and State Secretary Cojacaru joined, or Cojacaru, I can't pronounce Romanian, forgive me, joined a group of policy and military experts to discuss Black Sea security and observed river barges and cargo ships ferrying vital Ukrainian grain exports to the global market. We got to save all the people in the global south. They need their Gibbs. Yeah, that's what the Danube's about. It's the grain that needs to come out of Ukraine to make sure that people in Africa don't starve. Yeah. Anybody who pays attention to the Danube knows that it is an enormously important logistical artery, and that's what they give a shit about. Not to mention that Serbia is along that artery as well, as I said. The following day, both leaders visited Romania's 86th airbase in Borcea, who knows, where they met with members of a Romanian F-16 squadron supporting NATO combat air patrols and Black Sea air policing operations. So we could see that the U.S. is very interested, NATO is very interested in keeping Romania on side. That country is a big one, has a large military, comparatively speaking, with compared to a lot of other European countries and their armies. It's right there on the Black Sea. Again, it's the head of their Black Sea Command. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff. If you look back a few months, Biden's wife was there. There's talk about how they're going to be buying new jets to upgrade their air force. And there's even stuff, I think it's about new energy facilities, maybe even nuclear energy. I can't remember. But the point is that Romania is the place where the West is like doubling down on everything to keep their foothold there. Because there's the issue with Moldova, as we're about to see. Bulgaria looks to be going the other way. Remember, it's important, as I said, that Bulgaria boxes in Romania to the south. Moldova would box it into the north. So if Russia can reassert control over Moldova in some fashion via Transnistria or otherwise, and cut off the Ukrainians from their access to the Black Sea, then that just leaves Romania and Georgia as the big countries they have to deal with in some respect in order to deal with everything that's going on in the Black Sea. And again, I think the Black Sea is a large part of what's important here, as well as having NATO on Russia's flank there in a way where basically if they get past Donbass, they've got clear going to move whole divisions all the way up to the ring road of Moscow. So yeah, so they're strategic concerns about access to the heart of Russia via Donbass by Western armies. But I think it's also very much about Black Sea energy as well. All right, so let's check another one here. Ooh, interesting. IMF Executive Board concludes first reviews under the Extended Credit Facility and Extended Fund Facility arrangements for the Republic of Moldova. For those who've been following this, you'll know that basically they said, "Oh, wait, we got these problems with Russia and Ukraine. Let's go ahead and fast track Ukraine to come in to be a NATO country." And they also said, "We're going to fast track Moldova for EU membership and this sort of thing." Sorry, for Ukraine and Moldova. I should not say NATO at this point, though that's definitely coming almost immediately down the road. It's EU accession. So we know that they suddenly said, "Oh shit, we got to make sure that Moldova moves in now. We need to give them a very big carrot. We need to get them on side right now because Russia's going to be going for them." I believe Russia is going to be going for them. The West certainly believes that Russia is going to be going for Moldova via Transnistria in some sense. We just saw that in this article we looked at here, the one that I read to you by the guy from Kommersant newspaper. And now we can see it reflected not only in the joint statement with Romania, because there's been a lot of talk about mobilizing Romania to go and maybe make some kind of arrangement to bring Moldova back in some sense. And they're also trying to do everything they can right now in order to get Moldova on board and give it a lifeline with money and the rest. So the main bullet points here: the IMF Executive Board completed the first reviews under the ECF EFF arrangements with Moldova, providing the country with access to about $27 million US. Remember, Moldova is tiny. The impact of the war in Ukraine has yet to fully materialize, with the economy projected to stagnate in 2022 amid spillovers from the war, rising food and energy costs, and fragile confidence. Moldova's program is advancing governance reforms. Governance, not government reforms, governance reforms. Whenever you see that word governance, you know you're talking about global behind the scenes manipulations, because that's what governance is. We have our own governments, but weirdly, no one wants to talk about governments anymore. They want to talk about governance. You know what governance is? It's the World Health Organization. It's organizations like the World Economic Forum or the players that gather at those. It's like Davos. It's like BBC and CNN. You know, these are these are the instruments, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, or what Tony Blair's doing. That's governance. So yeah, they need to Moldova's program is advancing governance reforms critical to increasing the country's resilience to shocks while also providing additional resources to meet urgent socioeconomic needs. So they're moving fast on Moldova. Everybody, keep your eyes on Moldova. Let's take another look at some of this. Romania reacts to Belarus president's rhetoric. That's another thing that's interesting. Apparently, Poroshenko has been Lukashenko. Oh, sorry. Embarrassing lapse. Lukashenko has apparently been brought on side. He's had it explained to him, what side his bread is buttered on, and now he's cleaving pretty closely to Russia. I heard on some of the recent stuff, I think it was Military Summary Channel, that they were talking about locking down the border and not allowing young people to leave Belarus. There's the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which is interesting and important. If Russia does in fact proclaim that it's that it is that these referendums happened, and it asserts that that this territory is now Russia, then that invokes the Collective Security Treaty Organization guarantees, which are much like NATO's, which assert that if Russia is attacked, all the other members of the organization will treat it as an attack on themselves. So, it's certainly conceivable that if that goes down, that you could see a whole new Ukrainian front open up in relation to Belarus. But this is just another little blip on the radar to pay attention to. Romanian Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced that the charge d'affaires of Belarus and Romania was summoned to the ministry after Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko said on September 17th that the U.S. was pushing Europe into a military confrontation with Russia on the territory of Ukraine, and that other states, including Romania, would be directly involved. Romania sees such statements as inadmissible, stressing the role and international responsibility of Belarus as an accomplice of Russia in supporting the war of aggression at Ukraine. It's just stupid and preposterous. Like, I don't even know what this means. It basically just means woof, woof, woof from Romania in response to the woof, woof, woof of Belarus. But the bottom line is, yes, Romania is increasingly involved in all of this. And Lukashenko is right. He's also doubtless considering the fact that he and the Belarusians Belarusians, or however the fuck you say it, may themselves get involved in all of this. But we have to keep an eye on all of these former Soviet and earlier Russian satellite states in the region of the Black Sea and bordering on the Ukraine. Let's move on to another one here. What's the next one? Moldova's moment. This is from the Modern War Institute at West Point. So this is coming out from the military folks. This is from a couple weeks back. Moldova's moment. How can Europe's poorest country deter Russian aggression? Well, not with their military, I'll tell you that. So basically, I don't want to read all this out to you, but this is U.S. military folks talking about what can be done with Moldova to stop Russian aggression, which means they continue to see Moldova as a place where all of this is likely to open up with actual kinetic warfare. And for those who don't remember, right, basically right here is where the Russians are, right at this point, on this southern point, south, almost the most southwestern point of the Kherson front. They've basically just got to cross right here, and they're right at Transnistria. And when they're in Transnistria, they're in Moldovan territory. So it's this far that Russian troops would have to cover. Now, I'm not saying it'd be easy, but because doubtless the West has been preparing there for some time. But this is not a great deal of distance to cross to get Moldova directly involved. And we still haven't gotten to the winter yet. So I wanted to raise that point. Let's get over here. What's another one? Now, this is, I think, the last one we've got for Moldova. Is it? No, it's almost. So there are two here. These are the last point. This is the Moldovan president, right? Moldova has like refused to open up a second front in Transnistria against the Russians. And so you had that guy I was reading earlier talking about how they should do it and Ukraine should attack Transnistria. Don't wait for Moldova to do it. We see that Moldova is being fast tracked for EU well, they're an EU candidate now, and they're trying to fast track getting them in. Well, now we've got the IMF and the rest talking about how they're moving ahead with making all of this. They're moving ahead with making all of this happen in order to throw some bones to Moldova and get them on side. And they're pushing to get Romania in a good position to be able to assist Moldova. So what's happening now? Well, now the Moldovan president is calling, perhaps again, for all Russian troops to leave the country. We ask for a complete and unconditional withdrawal of the Russian troops, President of Moldova, Maya Sandu, stated in her speech before the plenary session of the United Nations General Assembly on September 21st. And they're talking about they then mention the troops that Russia has stationed in Transnistria, the ones that are supposedly Transnistrian troops and the other ones that are supposedly peacekeepers. The illegal presence of Russian military troops in the Transnistria region violates our neutrality and increases the security risks for our country. We call on the complete and unconditional withdrawal of Russian troops. We call on the destruction of ammunition from the Kobazna stockpiles, which pose a security and environmental threat to the region as a whole. So, basically, Moldova is now upping the rhetoric for Russia to get out at the same time that we're seeing things like military discussion of how Moldova can deter Russian aggression, at the same time that we're seeing escalating rhetoric. At the same time, we're seeing IMF trying to get money to Moldova quickly. At the same time, we're seeing the joint statement on Romanian defense and, Romania getting Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. All of this stuff. Remember, Moldova is like a sort of like a northern suburb of Romania, right? And I believe historically it was for a time a part of Romania. So all of this is related to Moldova. Basically, the NATO powers know that Russia is eyeing this spot and was historically there and wants to have that access to the Danube without having to go as far as Serbia to get it. And anyways, we'll soon see, Serbia is still a big question mark. So there's one other one on this subject with Moldova. Just another article. Let's see if it has anything else. They're basically just say, we have worked harder than ever to maintain peace on both banks of the Dniester River. We have done our best to ensure that all citizens of Moldova, including those residing in the breakaway region, continue to enjoy peace. So basically, it's just another announcement. No further information is given on that subject. So let's jump over to Bulgaria, where I had suggested. Let me get a bigger map of the region so you can see what's going on here. Right now, you should be able to see what's happening, right? Here's Ukraine, right? Russia has this whole eastern section and Crimea. They would just need to cross this far to get to Transnistria, which is right in, other way, which is right in here, right? So they just need to get basically from here to here. There's that little distance, right? And that would give them Transnistria, which allow them to exert pressure on Moldova. Moldova, in turn, allows them to exert pressure on Romania. It gives them a little slice of land on the Danube, right? And then, of course, if Russia can cover this area, it's going to be able to take this portion from Ukraine as well. Or I'm sorry, no, that's in Romania. I'm sorry. How do the borders run right there? Oh, no. Okay. So that's still Ukraine right here, right? So if Russia can take this area here and connect with Transnistria, it gives it more leverage on Romania. It gives it access to the Danube right here. And they'll have the coastline basically running from here across Odessa, Crimea, Sevastopol. They'll have the Sea of Azov. They have Abkhazia. And then Georgia is more NATO aligned, but they're being very careful at this point. So basically, it would give Russia about a third or a quarter of the Black Sea coastline. And if you add in Bulgaria, if that goes back under Russian influencing or control, however indirect, then they'd get this bit of the coastline too. Okay, so but the reason that we're also looking at Bulgaria is because Bulgaria is a NATO member and it's an EU member, though it's not in the Schengen zone. And if they can get Bulgaria on side and Moldova on side, then you can see they're sort of pinching Romania here. And that little Moldovan bit will give it access to the Danube, which will create the ability to cause pressure all the way up the Danube, because the Danube runs, through Serbia and Hungary and on up into Germany. So that's why we're looking at Bulgaria. So what do we have here? Let's get over to Bulgaria. Well, the main thing is that Bulgaria did, in fact, turn towards Russia. They had a government that was very, very much pro-EU and was full of all the pretty stuff about the future and getting rid of corruption, and we'll finally modernize and all this other stuff. Russia pulled some levers. They have great influence in Bulgaria still, and that government collapsed sometime not long after my last video on a resurgent Russia. And so now what's happening is that the new government, I can't remember if it's an interim one or if a new one has voted and been formed. We'll see here when we read this. But now Bulgaria is basically saying, look, we just need to get gas so that we can ride out the winter. Russia is not our enemy. And so let's look at this article. Sofia, September 20th, Bulgaria's state gas company Bulgargaz is launching 3 tenders for liquefied natural gas on Tuesday to avoid winter shortages and ensure long-term energy security, said Chief Executive Denitsa Slateva. The Balkan country was almost totally reliant on Russian gas before Moscow cut deliveries in August and is now struggling to secure sufficient supplies at affordable prices for businesses in the European Union's poorest member state. The interim cabinet, so it looks like it's still interim. The interim cabinet that took office in August after the collapse of the coalition led by reformist Premier Kirill Petkov, which refused to pay for Russian gas in rubles, has asked Gazprom to consider restoring supplies to Bulgaria. It is also holding talks with Azerbaijan to boost gas deliveries during the winter. Bulgaria is also considering opening tenders for pipeline gas from neighboring Turkey, Interim Energy Minister Rosen Hristov said. So basically, you had an anti-Russia government. It got replaced with a government that's pro-Russia, but it's probably trying to show itself as being more neutral. And that new interim government at this point, at least as of the time of writing this just a week ago, has gone hat in hand to Russia to say, hey, can you give us some gas? So we're very likely to see Bulgaria work something out with Russia. And as countries around it continue to have much more serious problems, we're likely to see, what is this shit on my screen? Get out of my screen. We're likely to see Bulgaria doing well energy-wise due to it going hat in hand to Russia and serving as an example to others in the region of how good things can be, relatively speaking, if you just go with Russia. Let's look here. What else do we have? So Russia files celebrate Putin. This is coming out of France. This is one of the French English language publications. I think they've got their own proper French version too, but they're basically just talking about how people in Bulgaria incomprehensibly seem to be pro-Russian. Now, it's not all Bulgarians. I think they do have a minority that wants to very much to go with the West, but here we can see that the European media's outlets are having to basically grapple with the fact that Bulgaria continues to be pretty pro-Russian. And the anti-Russian government that they doubtless paid an enormous amount of money and bribes to get into power just got knocked out very, very neatly and very quickly. Very, very quickly. So this kind of thing could happen in Moldova as well. I do not doubt. The only thing Moldova has going for it is that Romania does seem to be pretty much under the NATO thumb and liking it. And they're adjacent to Moldova and can do quite a bit there. and it's a very small space, so small countries. So presumably you could fill it with intelligence operatives and security, and keep Russia from pulling something off. But I don't think it can be ruled out. I don't think the possibility can be ruled out. Do we have anything else here? Yeah. Here we have, Bulgaria is inside the EU and they seem to be going pro-Russian, and Hungary is, relatively speaking, pro-Russian. So you've got Bulgaria and Hungary that are, relatively speaking, two pro-Russian countries. Bulgaria would seem to have been firmly under control of Western powers, NATO and EU powers, but again, very quickly that government got pushed out. So now they're looking at the prospect of Bulgaria and Hungary both being inside the EU, though not necessarily in the Schengen zone, and Bulgaria being a NATO country. Can't remember if Hungary is as well. Somebody can maybe tell me in the chat. But but here you see they're in Europe. They're grappling with the problem there. So I can't get to the article because it's behind a paywall, but you get the gist. Now let's move to the last one. Well, one of the last ones that we're going to have to take a look at here, which is Serbia. I've had a number of Serbians come in and mention, at least on Telegram, maybe on Twitter as well, and sometimes in the chat here, they've been like Vucic or whatever his damn name is, that he's just a creature of the the West, and that he can't be relied upon in any way. I don't know, man. I've watched some stuff from Vucic, and I don't speak Serbo-Croatian or Serbian or whatever. I am certainly not in the country. I can't pretend to know a great deal about what's going on there, though I tend to like Serbs, I'll just tell you honestly. But Vucic, regardless, and I said this in a previous video, he does not seem to me to be an idiot. He seems to be he seems to have a lot more going on underneath the surface than you might think. I don't think it's as simple as he's under the thumb of one group or the other, and I continue to hold out the possibility that he could do some very surprising things. So let's take a quick look here at the headlines I pulled up. Let's see where they are. Yeah, okay. So we can see a lot going on with Serbia. So one of them is this recent stuff that we've seen with NATO, and it just sort of appeared out of the blue. A lot of people have characterized it as Putin trying to find ways to create problems further west in the Balkans because he's not getting his way in Ukraine. The bottom line is, though, that we've seen some headlines, and reportedly there's some tension between Serbia and the Albanians in Kosovo over the Serbian populations that are still in Kosovo, who do seem to be getting, unsurprisingly, screwed. Kosovo is very, very important for the United States with their military base there. And so I think they're going to be more than happy to screw anyone there, whomever they need to, in order to be able to keep that foothold, that footprint, that beachhead. But be aware of that. There's been squawking about Kosovo as though that could all open up again. I'm not saying it will, but that prospect has been dangled out there as a way to say, hey, take it easy. At the same time, where is it here? We see that the Putin met with Vucic, or who is this he met with? I'm sorry, he met with he met with a Serb separatist leader. I think that's from Bosnia. So this is another Serbian representative. Met with Putin in Moscow, and this same fellow apparently endorsed what's being called Moscow's aggression in Ukraine. So this is another outreach type thing for the Serbs. I'm sorry I didn't prep on that particular article better people. I might be talking out of my ass a little bit here. It looks like, yeah, this is an article about a Serb separatist leader, Milorad Dodik. But where did he come from? Serb member of Bosnia and Herzegovina's tripartite presidency. Okay, so he's dealing with the Serbs who are stuck in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
trying to reach out a warm and welcoming hand to them. And then we also see, I got to get to that one in a minute. Where is it? We also see, Russia apparently backing Serbia's concerns about the Serbs who are in Kosovo. So it's another Serbian group in a Balkan country that's been cut. Basically, all these attempts. The reason that you have so many damn Serbs in these other countries is because after the wars in Yugoslavia and the bombing of Belgrade and all that, the West said, look, the biggest problem we could have is with Serbia, so we need to just cut this damn country up. So they have absolutely raped Serbia to divide it across all these. I mean, it's a typical Balkan thing, which goes back to the Turks, probably to the Habsburgs, certainly to the Turks, where they just arbitrarily divide shit up in order to keep a power block from forming or to create frozen conflicts or to keep anything from solidifying there. So you've got all these parts of what should be Serbia that are cut up into these other countries. And then you have minorities there who are essentially getting screwed. You know why? All because of Russia's strong historical relations with Serbia. They just don't want Russian power that far west. Remember, Serbia is on the Danube as well. So I guess what I'm pointing at here is that Russia continues to engage in outreach towards Serbs in Serbia as well as these other countries. And we're seeing the possibility of trouble in Kosovo being raised, which should, alarm Europeans. They certainly don't need those problems right now, along with all the others that might be coming for them. And there was just here it is. Basically, Russia and some of the Serbians got together recently, and there was an agreement signed with Russia. And I think this was on the site. Yeah, it was on the sidelines at the UN General Assembly. So let me read this part out. Serbian minister defends deal with Russia amid criticism. Let me pull this article up so you can see it. Sorry, guys. No, I want this one. Yes. Belgrade, Serbia, Associated Press. This is the Associated Press, by the way. Bear this in mind. Serbia's foreign minister on Sunday sought to play down the importance of an agreement with Russia after the Balkan state that is seeking European Union membership faced criticism for signing it. Nikola Selakovic signed the agreement Friday along with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly meeting in New York, where most Western delegations shunned Russia's top diplomat over the country's invasion of Ukraine. Selakovic said at a news conference Sunday that the agreement is a technical one and relates to bilateral ties but not security issues. Gee, I wonder if it has anything to do with energy. The government, quote, the government could have rejected such a plan, but there is nothing contentious in it, he added. It's being criticized by those who haven't seen it. And indeed, it is being criticized everywhere if you do a search for it, and yet no information on what it pertained to is being given at all. There are just lots of people saying, well, we should just drop Serbia's ideas of becoming an EU member state completely because this agreement was signed. And also, by the way, we're not going to mention anything about what's in the agreement. The Serbs themselves say it's a technical agreement, doesn't have anything to do with security. My guess is it's all about energy. You could have the exceedingly embarrassing spectacle of Serbia staying warm and comfortable while the rest of Europe rapidly turns into a shit sandwich. The consultation plan covered by the agreement is expected to last for 2 years, Serbia's foreign ministry said in a Friday statement. Serbia officially is a candidate for the European Union membership, but the government maintains good relations with Russia. The news of the deal triggered harsh criticisms from the this is a serious scandal. In the midst of a raging war, Serbia plans to signs the plan on future collaboration with the aggressor. That's the kind of crap coming from EU MPs, whatever. So they're making it sound like something terrible, but at the same time, you can see that Serbia is trying to walk a line, because then around the same time you see, or a little bit later, you see them saying, Serbia does not recognize referendums in occupied territories of the Ukraine, which just points to me that Serbia is saying, look, in reality, we have a long-standing relationship with Russia, and we're going to sign some deals, probably deals for gas and energy. But at the same time, because we're catching so much shit about it, we got to throw a bone to the EU side of things and say that, we do not recognize referenda. Serbian foreign minister, the same one who signed the deal with Russia, says These referenda are contrary to the UN Charter and the generally recognized principles and norms of international law. Serbia does not recognize the results of pseudo-referendums on the Ukrainian lands occupied by Russia, since this is completely contrary to the state and national interests of the country, Mr. Selakovic spelt out. So, yeah, it looks like Serbia is trying to walk a line, and it's a very, very difficult one to walk. If they attempt to ensure that they're going to have gas supplies for the winter, then EU people come down on them hard. And so they're forced to turn around and throw some bones in the other direction to appear to be neutral players and all the rest. And what other stuff do we have? Serbian minister, we already did that one. What's another one here? We did that one. We did that one. Serbia. Now, Vucic appears. This is from roughly the last week or two, like all these things I'm reading. Vucic announces new political movement within 6 months. By trying to create a new broad political movements, critics say Serbia's president is trying to address a drop in popularity of the ruling party and spread the blame for tough decisions to come. Who knows? But this is interesting here. Apparently, Vucic is trying to position himself where he's saying Serbian interests first, neither east nor west. But you can see how that would very much suit a rapprochement with Russia under color of neutrality, because they could say, look, Russia's got energy. Serbia needs it. We're not pro-Russia. We're not pro-West. We're going to cut this deal with Russia, which ensures continuing energy relationships there, which ensures that Russia continues to have this foothold in Europe, in the Balkans, much further west than its other places where it can exert influence, like Bulgaria. So, we can hear this kind of rhetoric. We have to raise our heads and voices for a normal and strong Serbia that will take care of itself, not others, said Vucic, whose Progressive Party has been in government for the past decade. Under Vucic, who's been president since 2017, Serbia has officially sought closer integration with the European Union, but without burning bridges with fellow Orthodox ally Russia. So it sounds like he's in the middle with some things. But keep an eye. All of this is to say that the fight behind the scenes is still going on in Serbia. Serbia has not fully knuckled under, apparently, to the EU. Russia continues to have influence there. And, my guess is that if Russia wanted to assert that influence, now is the time to do it. Just like in Bulgaria, just like in Moldova, for Russia, it's do or die in terms of continuing to have influence in these areas. Because NATO powers have shown that they're fully willing to go to the mat here. I mean, thus far, short of putting their own troops in there officially, because I believe they're there unofficially, certainly as advisors, certainly for intelligence, certainly for logistics, certainly for training. And I believe they have mercenaries there as well. So really, NATO is as fully involved in fighting Russia in the Ukraine as they can be, short of officially doing it. I'm not sure that there's much more they can do to get involved without doing it officially. It's crazy. So what's next? Okay, so Georgia. I'm not really clear on what's happening with Georgia. Once upon a time, it looked like the West was going to be able to peel Georgia off, and they went for South Ossetia. And Russia came in and took South Ossetia, which again is related to the Georgian military highway. You can see all of that and other routes year round through the few passes where that's possible in the Caucasus. Since then, I'm not sure about this. I'm not in Georgia. I don't understand the political situation there fully. But, at the same time that they're fast tracking Moldova, they told Georgia that they're going to still have to wait in order to be, fully considered as a candidate that's, fully in the list. So Moldova got fast tracked much quicker than Georgia. And you can say, well, Georgia is kind of a backwater economically, and it's a small country, and it's got lots of corruption and problems. By comparison, Moldova, to Moldova, Georgia looks like Switzerland. Moldova is just fucked economically. It has almost no power. It's a tiny country. Just to let you know, the biggest export from Moldova is house cleaners and nannies going to Istanbul to work for Turks. I mean, so Georgia got screwed in terms of EU accession with Moldova being prioritized. And Georgia seems to be trying to walk a line very carefully, not to get too much on Russia's bad side. So I don't know what's going on there, but my sense is that, and you know, your mileage may vary. I'm no expert here, and I haven't followed it closely. If people know otherwise, let me know. But Georgia seems to be coming back around, if not to a pro-Russian position. Certainly, elements in the country are working hard to try to position themselves as neutral at this point, and I think that's part of why Europe is the EU is punishing them, telling them that they need all kinds of changes to their judiciary. So keep a close eye on what's going on in Georgia. There's just one last thing here. Georgian Prime Minister: Russia continues to occupy Georgia. Country has to avoid many provocations and manage borderizations. Russia continues to occupy Georgia, and since then, the country has to avoid. By that, they mean what they view as the occupation of their territory in South Ossetia. Russia continues to occupy Georgia, and since then, since 2008, the country has to avoid a lot of provocations and manage the borderization process, as well as many other problems. Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Garibashvili said on Wednesday at a joint press conference with Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Garibashvili said Russia's unjustified aggression and large-scale war in Ukraine had radically changed the situation in the world, including in the Black Sea region, and noted Georgia had been the first to experience such war in 2008, after which Russia has occupied Georgia's significant part, 20% of the territory, the government administration said. I also want to say that we've given maximum support to Ukraine. We stand in solidarity with them. We've sent more than 1,000 tons of humanitarian cargo. We have seconded a lot of resolutions in support of Ukraine, and we are doing our best within our capacity, noted the Prime Minister. There's nothing really else there, but to me, that sounds like what's happening is Georgia has to be very, very careful just for the current regime to stay in power. I think they've got a previous leader in prison, which is why the EU is complaining about the judiciary there. But they have been punished in terms of their track for accession. So keep an eye on Georgia. Don't really know what's happening there yet, but something, and it's interesting. Now, I think in closing, we should take a look at this material that Charlemagne shared. Let me see if I can pull up his Substack so I can address this information. First thing is that, let me see if I can, I'm just going to come back to me for a minute and see if I can find this clip. First off, again, I support Charlemagne going out there and finding whatever he can and bringing new takes in, because there, to me, seems to be a real lack of critical thought on the part of people on the right who are trying to figure this shit out. Some people do a reasonable job, but there's a lot of repeating of what other people are saying. Some of that's difficult to avoid. As I said, I don't speak Ukrainian or Russian, so I can't go look at primary sources. I'm not there on the ground. I can't call up friends and family there. You know, I could call friends in Turkey about something there. Can't do it in Ukraine. Got no special insight. So I see why people have to take the secondary sources and repeat them. But I still think that there's a lack of desire to go ferret out other takes and to put this picture together properly. And Charlemagne is a part of the solution to that, I believe, not a part of the problem. So let me get over here to it. Okay, so Charlemagne's Substack. Let me just get the link here. Whoops, whoa. Oh, I also said that I was going to mention the Collective Security Treaty Organization. I did briefly. Let me just wrap that part before we jump to Charlemagne. There are a number of states that are a part of it. That's Russia's version of NATO. And so if as if there's any question, the eastern parts of Ukraine do declare democratically in their referenda that they want to be a part of Russia, then that makes that a part of Russia as soon as the Duma and Russia and Putin confirm it. And then presumably that would invoke the stuff with the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Members include Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, and Tajikistan. Now,
There's former states that were a part of it. Azerbaijan's been peeled off. Georgia's been peeled off. Uzbekistan just constantly flirts about it and gets forced to be a part of it in some respects, but kind of keeps its distance. I think China and the West, but particularly China, have a heavy influence on Uzbekistan. I think Turkey too. And Uzbekistan is a big cotton producing region, so it's not just energy there. Uzbekistan is very on again, off again. They seem to have been peeled partially out of Russian orbit. Georgia is mostly out of Russian orbit. Azerbaijan now is mostly out of Russian orbit. This will become important when we deal with some of the points raised by the guy that Charlemagne is talking about discussed. We'll come back to that in a minute. The fact that these countries that were part of the Collective Security Treaty Organization with Russia have been peeled off by Western powers. And then there are observer states. Note the observer states. Serbia and Afghanistan. But Serbia is a non-member observer state, has been since 2013. Out of these countries, the militaries for them do not seem very, very big. It's not really, they're not huge countries with important militaries. The after Russia, the third biggest is Kazakhstan, with a active military of, and these figures are from like 2018, so don't assume that they're up to date, but they give you some sense of what we're dealing with, right? Kazakhstan has an active military of 108,000 and a reserve of 132,000, 30,000 paramilitary, so for a total of 270,000. It's something. It's not nothing. It could make a difference, but Kazakhstan is being very coy. And remember that there was some kind of behind the scenes attempted coup and some weird reshuffling going there. Russia had to send rapid reaction force from its Collective Security Treaty Organization to shut that down. And that was actually the first time that group, if I remember correctly, from the CSTO had been deployed. So Kazakhstan saying, yeah, we're with Russia, but we're not going to bow down and worship them. They seem to be being pulled over into the Chinese sphere to some extent, and Turkey has an influence there, certainly. So Kazakhstan, you can't really rely on much. Belarus, which the West had been trying hard to peel off from Russia, now seems to have gotten its mind right and knows what side its bread's buttered on, as I said. Belarus is the second biggest power after Russia in this group. They have an active military of only 65,000, related to Kazakhs, 108,000, but their reserve is 290,000, and their paramilitary is 110,000, giving them, as of 2018, if these figures are to be trusted, giving them in the neighborhood of total forces, again, including paramilitary and reserve, but total forces of 465,000. Armenia, small, not very big, and all their forces are going to be necessary for what they're dealing with Nagorno-Karabakh, presumably. So Belarus, and then to a much lesser extent Kazakhstan, are the only two countries that I think matter. If indeed the eastern regions of Ukraine do declare in referenda that they want to be a part of Russia, and the Duma signs off on it, and now we say this is Russia. Kazakhstan, I don't know. Belarus, though, there's a very real possibility that you could see Belarus mobilize and even move into Ukrainian territory, opening up another front. So I just wanted to cover that CSTO stuff before we jump over to this business that Charlemagne shared. So where is that one? I just opened the damn thing. Let me do it again. I got too many. There it is. CharlemagneSubstack.com. So now, first thing I should say, whether I agree with Charlie on this or not, on the specifics that the guy he shared puts forth, I certainly support Charlemagne in terms of just wanting to go look everywhere and anywhere to try to get a take on this. And again, I recommend his Substack, as well as Apostolic Majesty for historical context, Charlemagne's channel in general, and The Prudentialist, good buddy Prudentialist, who is staying up on strategic happenings out there in the big wider world. Let me see if I can, oh god damn it, every time I go to open this, there we go. Let me see if I can carry this over so you guys can see it as I do. Let me just close this Telegram window.
Sorry, peoples. There's just a bunch of shit. I've got endless tabs. Okay, now, yes, in theory, you will be able to see this. So you guys can go and check this out to see what you think of it. I recommend you do. I should also say that I have not yet had a chance to watch everything that this guy has put out there. And what we're dealing with here is two things, as will become clear as we go forward. There's a guy called Ivan the Heathen, and I don't think that somebody with a proper dissident right persona being chosen as the mouthpiece for this, if indeed it's not just him spontaneously doing something, I don't think that's an accident. Nor do I think it's an accident that as he talks about this, he uses terms like midwit and talks about the dissident right. I don't think it's an accident that that he's got black letter text on the shirt that he's wearing. If indeed he is not someone who really is exactly what he says he is, then there are certain signs here. But anyway, Ivan the Heathen apparently sets forth his own views and then includes a clip that he went to considerable trouble to translate into English for everyone. So if nothing else, Charlemagne, this Ivan the Heathen guy, and the material, the original content that's posted is interesting because somebody went to the trouble to give you a good English translation of what's being discussed, and it's a different take on things. So basically, let me just read some of what Charlemagne says about this. You should go again, subscribe to his Substack and read it yourself. But he mentions that there's new information on the war in Ukraine. It puts it in a new light. This Ivan the Heathen guy is a Ukrainian native who speaks Ukrainian, Russian, and English. Charlemagne himself says you should watch the entire video. The basic summary is that when all this broke out in February, the Ukrainian government basic summary of the position this guy and the people he includes video segments from. The basic picture they set forth is that their take is that on February 24, 2022, the Ukrainian government was filled with fifth columnists who intended to surrender the country to Russia. This goes all the way up to President Zelensky himself, who was not, in fact, a Western stooge, but a Russian one. President Zelensky had issued orders to the Ukrainian military designed to allow the Russian army to simply march into the country and take it over without a fight. However, Ukrainian generals loyal to Ukraine and not its president disobeyed orders and arranged for a real defense of Ukraine. What proceeded to happen is that the Russian military marched into the country as planned, but began to face opposition that it not only did not expect, but was entirely unprepared for. The military force that Mr. Putin sent into Russia was nothing more than a military parade that would accept the surrender of Ukraine and cede control over the country in whole or in part to Russia. Mr. Putin made the grave mistake of believing that President Zelensky stood for Ukraine, when in fact he himself was not the only one Putin was dealing with. Russia therefore found itself in a war that was not supposed to happen. Charlie said he likes this because Charlemagne says he likes this, Mr. Maine, because there are a bunch of odd things that have always irritated him about all of this that didn't make any sense, and this presumably provides some plausible explanation. One, an immense Russian death toll at the beginning of the war. I don't know what to say about that. I think plenty of Russians did die, but we don't have any figures. We've just got claims about an enormous Russian death toll, and at this point, I haven't seen anything to corroborate the idea that they suffered an immense death toll at the beginning. So I don't know that fact needs to be accounted for. Charlemagne points out bizarre Russian paratrooper operations. I don't know that they were really bizarre, because everything that could be described as a total debacle of trying to march towards Kiev and everything else and having it not work could just as easily be described as a feint. And if anybody else has heard differently about this, let me know. But I am aware of no significant Russian paratrooper concentrations, maybe 5, maybe 10 or something. Even that I haven't heard of, but I haven't heard anything about large numbers of Russian paratroopers being cut off and captured. So if you deploy them to a place where it seems like, in retrospect, they could have never done much, well, in the fog of war, when it's all happening and it's all, happening very, very quickly in those first few days, when Russia first moved into Ukraine, could easily be a feint. So I don't know that it's so weird that it requires special explanation. Same with the Kiev offensive, the idea that they never really could have taken Kiev or Kharkov. To me, and I could be wrong, I'm not saying I'm right, I don't know. But certainly the idea that these were feints that caused Ukraine to have to go deal with the possibility of these other things, at least for a time, in such fashion that it allowed Russia to make considerable and substantial gains, which they've been able to hold for the most part in eastern Ukraine. That could easily have been a feint. And to me, that seems like the most plausible explanation. Maybe they said also it's a gimme. Let's just throw shit and see what sticks to the wall. Maybe we'll get a freebie. It could have been that too. But the whole movement towards the capital, that seems to be a feint that got a whole bunch of Ukrainian forces involved there. Why did Russia take over so much land in the first 2 months, then stall? Well, my argument is that Russia is fighting against the entire West. Yes, they haven't sent in regular troops officially, but there's every reason to believe that there's certainly mercenaries operating there, and there's every reason to believe that there are very large numbers of them deployed in areas where it's particularly important, where they need people with good infantry training and unit behavior, that's integrated or integrated across units in offensive operations. They're definitely getting logistical support from the West. They're having billions of dollars poured in from the West. They're having huge amounts of equipment poured in from the West. They've got command and control support from the West. They've got satellites pointed at the region from the West. They've got, the idea that this is difficult for Russia is not there's nothing surprising about it at all. And that's one of the problems. Well, let me get through the list and then none of this is an attack on Charlemagne at all. But I'm just saying there are other ways that this could be construed. Another issue is, why is Zelensky constantly running around the world on apparent diplomatic missions? Shouldn't he be in Ukraine directing the war effort? No. Any more than Biden should be somewhere directing the war effort. These people are all figureheads. Zelensky is nothing but a figurehead, an obnoxious one, a particularly repulsive and disgusting one. But he's a politician. That means he's a whore. He's got knee pads. He's got Astroglide all over his mouth, or, drools dribbling down his chin. That goes for all politicians everywhere. I'm not being anti-Ukraine. That goes for Liz Truss. I'm sure it goes for any number of Russian politicians I can't name. I'm sure it goes for Lukashenko. I'm sure it goes for van der Leyen. It probably goes for Maloney. So, the issue of why is Zelensky constantly running around? Who cares? He's utterly meaningless other than as a propaganda figure. And indeed, he and his TV show crew that were put into office are there for that very reason. What's up with the Kharkov offensive? How did Ukraine actually pull this off, and why did it take so long? I think they just concentrated their forces and decided to go after it. It's plausible. I think in some ways, I don't know what happened to Kharkiv. Maybe they did get pushed out. Maybe they were retreating. I tend to think it was a combination of both, because they decided to consolidate, because they had every reason to believe that Ukraine was capable of, and indeed did, as we've seen, put together significant forces to carry on an offensive. And I don't agree with Alexander Makuris that nothing's happening with them. And with the exception of the region to the north of Zaporizhia or whatever, the northern part of the Zaporizhia region that's held by Russia, with the exception of there, where we haven't seen a major advance, we've seen major offensive stuff in Kharkov that was successful. Who knows why? Like I said, maybe they got pushed out. Maybe they're retreating already. I tend to think it was a combination of both. We continue to see massive offensive efforts being made in the region of Krasny Liman or Liman and on the Oskol River. We continue to see continuous it sounds redundant, doesn't it? We continue to see serious offensive efforts in Kherson. So for 2/3 of the front line, they've been conducting continuous offensive operations. And they are getting some, like I said, they've got like 3 salients across the Oskol River now, and they're successfully seem to be putting into place an encirclement movement on Liman. So, you know, why was it hard for Ukraine to pull it off? I don't know. They had to train people. They had to get their equipment together. They're fighting on these other fronts. They're doubtless losing men. I think it's fair to say that Ukraine is losing huge numbers of men. I think it's very likely they're losing a lot more than the Russians are. Here's another one. 7. Why has Russia's response been so schizo? For example, why are we still selling gas to Europe? Actually, no, we're cutting off the gas. Talking about the on again, off again thing. I think Russia, it can take in money. They have commercial obligations and contracts that they signed. And they're in a situation where they want to open those contracts up with India. They want to open such lines of gas to extend and expand their gas and oil lines to India and China. They have to be very, very careful to say, look, we will continue to meet our obligations despite the fact that this war is going on. They at least have to have plausible deniability. One of the major reasons why I continue to entertain my crazy idea that basically Russia and the United States, or powers in both those countries, are behind the scenes working together to crush Europe, just like they did in World War II. One of the reasons I continue to think that is because look what's happening. China and India are being, particularly China, is being pushed more into the orbit of energy reliance on Russia at the exact same time when we're seeing how much that can hurt a country that does so in future if they have a military conflict with Russia. So I mean it's almost crazy to me that China is being pushed together with Russia in this way, because Chinese know, there's no way that they don't know that's going to leave them susceptible in future to the same kind of stuff that Russia is now doing to Europe in association with the conflict that continues in the Ukraine. So it's very easy for me to see why Russia would really want to cut down on the strategic reserves in Germany and in other European countries, because they want to use this as one of their strategic hammers related to economics. But at the same time, they have to appear as though they're trying to cross their T's and dot their I's in terms of compliance with their contracts, because they're in the midst of bringing China online in these respects. So I don't think that needs explanation. You know, they don't want to seem as though they're just using it as a weapon, though of course they are. There are all kinds of reasons to establish plausible deniability. What's up with nuclear threats from Russia? I don't think that's difficult to understand. Just like the West bringing them up. The West wants to bring up the threat of nuclear war because it makes everybody worry, and it makes it seem like Russia is a loose cannon that has to be handled. Russia wants to bring up the threat of nuclear war because it's part of their strategic deterrence. And if everybody starts worrying about glowing in the dark, then it's likely that people will be like, whoa, 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 everybody has to stop. This is getting out of hand. Let's just stop right now. I don't have to go looking for any esoteric explanations of why Russia is putatively issuing nuclear threats. Why does Mr. Putin never mention Zelensky? Probably because he's beneath mention. He's disgusting. Yeah, I don't know, but I certainly don't feel that there's any reason why we'd have to go looking for some esoteric explanation. Charlemagne mentions Thomas 777, pondering why Mr. Putin has been such a bad military leader. Why didn't he storm across Ukraine with armored divisions? Why such a half-assed approach? Well, again, these are history books, man. Everything that's happening now is one day going to be a part of history books. And yes, realpolitik and actual military might trumps everything. But just look what happened with the history books, right? With Stalin and Hitler going after Poland. Right? They both invaded at the same time. Almost at the same time. Wow. Okay. But all we ever talk about in terms of people destroying Poland is the terrible stuff that the Nazis did. Now, I'm not saying the Poles don't know that both sides invaded them. Of course they do. However, the general story in the West is that we hear about how the Nazis decided the mid-century Germans, forgive me, I can't even say these forbidden words. The mid-century Germans decided to invade Poland, and only because of that was Stalin forced to have to invade. Gosh, he really didn't want to. Right. That's all a part of history. And Stalin did, if I remember correctly, wait until Germany had done it, even though they had agreed beforehand to do it together. And that's because Stalin was smart. Cocksucker said, okay, we'll let them go ahead and we'll even sign a deal and we'll grab it and we'll each have our half and we'll partition it and we'll fundamentally be allies. But by waiting a few days, that allowed them to construe it in the history books as a response to what the Germans had done, rather than a pact that they signed together to partition this country and take it over. And to this day, people just, oh yeah, it was a terrible the German aggression into Poland, and Stalin just had to respond. Of course, it's ridiculous. Of course, that's not what happened, but that's how it comes across, and all that comes with attention to narrative. So, why is Mr. Putin a bad military leader? Well, I mean, here's the reality. There's huge corruption in Russia. They've been trying to put their armed forces back together. I'm surprised that they had as much success as they did in South Ossetia in 2008. If you saw the units that were deployed and stuff, it looked like a ragtag bunch, man. Russia has been forced to put itself back together from the ground up, to build a stable currency, to develop over all these years since the fall of the Soviet Union some sort of economy, which is, mostly comes down to commodities, raw resources, arms, and energy. Russia has problems, and they've got long-standing problems of any number of kinds that are very real, that affect them as they attempt to deploy their military assets. So have they suffered problems? Yeah, all kinds of problems. A number of them are of the sort that you would expect. But, why did he not roll in with his own blitzkrieg? Well, first off, he kind of did. And with that blitzkrieg technique, he didn't end up taking much territory. He just moved past the hard points in order to have it appear that everything was being overrun. It looks to me like they were feints. Probably there were things handled badly. But I would not call Mr. Putin a bad military leader at this point. I don't think that there's any indication that he is. If you just go in there and say, we're going to crush you with overwhelming military might because commentators on the dissident right seem to think that that's what I should do, that screws up the whole narrative about being patient and having attempted to deal with this beforehand and suffering repeated provocations. He's also got to tune up his own population to be willing to accept mobilization. And the whole retreat from Kharkov, whether feigned or not, this is one of the possibilities that I had mentioned. They now have the public will, apparently. It hasn't broken down yet, their mobilization. They have public will behind it, saying, hey, wait a minute, we don't want to suffer this loss of face and this loss of territory, and having to look at all the lives that have been lost thus far as a waste. Their sacrifice must not have been in vain. And Mother Russia, we must go in and do something about this. He now seems to have, I mean, I can't claim total support because I don't know how to read all the signs, but he seems to be getting away with mobilization thus far. And again, I think part of that mobilization may be designed to deal with events with other fronts opening up, which I think is entirely possible. So this is interesting stuff. I'm totally for Charlemagne sharing it, and he regularly, like Prude and others, shares stuff with me that I would not have heard about otherwise. So I totally recommend him, and he's totally one of my peeps insofar as I have any, and he's part of AA's crew. So I want to be absolutely clear. I am not chiseling at Charlemagne. I appreciate this material. I also should say that I'm not still fully qualified to judge it, and he told me repeatedly to go watch all of it first before I did so. And I simply didn't have time before this stream because this all came up after I had decided to do this and had scheduled it. So I still need to watch more of it. I recommend that you guys do so too. You can go look for Ivan the Heathen, no spaces. That's the channel over on YouTube. And the title of the clip is Taras Chornovil and the Secret of the Ukrainian War. However, so that's by way of saying I'm not fully qualified to judge yet, but there are a few things that I have to say that I did watch. And first off, the first guy who speaks English, Ivan the Heathen, not to be confused with whoever Taras Chornovil is. That's the guy I still haven't watched yet. Taras Chornovil is the guy who says a number of things that lead Ivan the Heathen, who you can see on screen here, to reach his conclusions. But one of the major, well, first off, I should say he's more knowledgeable about the region than I am. Obviously, speaks the languages, obviously. So yeah, he knows people there, boots on the ground, understands the culture, absolutely. So I can't fault him on that. However, he does seem to be very much aligned towards, he seems to be tuned up to be someone to address the dissident right. And his main focus seems to be to address the dissident right. So I'm not saying he had a brief, but if somebody who was a competent English speaker had been tasked with addressing Western dissident right support for Russia and given a brief to try to bring the Western dissident right on side, when Russia has gone to great efforts to bring them on side, I'd expect him to show up with, for example, black letter text on his t-shirt. And I'd expect him to use dissident right terminology like midwit and to fashion himself as a heathen. So he would speak to the dissident right pagans, you know. Then again, maybe he's just Ivan the Heathen. Maybe he just happens to like, you know, the band or whatever it is that's represented by his shirt. And it just happens to be coincidence that is black letter. That is possible too. I don't know, but I can't help but notice that. As you listen to him speak and reference Moldbug and Soy Boys, or not Moldbug and Midwits and the Cathedral, you can see that he's tuned up specifically to address the dissident right. So if, for example, I was part of the West or Ukraine and wanted to, you know, my remit was to try to tamp down dissident right support, I'd come on just like he did. Now, another thing is he just opens up at the beginning endlessly talking about how the dissident right, they're a bunch of idiots with their takes on the Ukraine. They don't understand anything. They never understand other people and their cultures. They have no idea what they're fucking talking about, and that they're all stupid. I don't doubt that there are any number of doubt that there are any number of stupid people and stupid takes out there, but I haven't heard a lot of them. Even like Mercurius, who I see as being very much pro-Russia. And I think, you know, by design, he still shares all kinds of interesting information. He still qualifies a number of things. There are areas where I don't believe it, but there are all kinds of areas where whatever he's saying is perfectly reasonable. He's not an idiot. So I don't buy that. He seems to, and the big thing, a big point that he makes is the whole reason that everybody thinks that Russia is great and not a bag of dicks is because they think, well, if the West says it, I must assume the opposite. What? Who? I mean, yeah, there are probably actual morons and shills out there who play that game. I've never said it. So I want to get this taken care of straight up right now. I long ago said that I think Russia is going to win in this conflict. And I get all kinds of fucking assholes coming in and go, how do you feel now? Or you're going to have to eat crow again. Or and the implication from this guy is that we're just saying it because we're idiots and we don't understand other cultures. I speak Turkish. I lived in Turkey for 6 years, 2 different occasions. I almost married a Turkish woman. I study all kinds of European cultures. I study Turkish culture. I know about other cultures. I'm not an idiot. I don't think the things I think simply because the West said it, so I must assume it's the opposite. Like just straight out imbecilic, like toddler level reverse psychology bullshit. No. I'm going to tell you now the very simple and straightforward reasons why at the outset I said Russia was going to win. And you can tell me if they seem unreasonable. By articulating them clearly, you'll be able to say, yeah, that makes sense, or no, that doesn't make sense, or I disagree, or I disagree. But the point is, none of these, not one thing that I am about to say here has anything to do with me assuming that the West said something, so I must think the opposite. Not fucking one. And now I will review them. First off, Russia has larger military relative to Ukraine and even NATO forces immediately adjacent to the territory. This is a fact. They haven't mobilized all of them. As of like 2018, I think they were said to have 2 million in reserve. They've got a huge army. They've been successful in this area before. They've got rooms and rooms and rooms full of contingency planning and maps going all the way back prior to World War One, where they deal with the specifics of dealing with these rivers or these passes or these forests. Their war colleges are filled with people who were suckled, who were raised on the tit of their previous experiences in life or death conflict in these regions. So, period. Russia has the larger military immediately adjacent. They don't need to drop them in from fast rope them down from helicopters or drop them with high altitude low opening chutes. They don't have to ship them across the Atlantic or the Pacific. They just got to stick them on trains and trucks and drive them over there, and they've got the biggest military. This is a fact. Second, Russia had to rely and has had to rely more on human intelligence and cunning rather than high tech and big money than NATO, the Western powers, the United States, certainly. I assume, it's an assumption, but you can judge for yourself whether or not it's a reasonable one, that this creates more capable players. Who's going to be a more capable player? Someone who sits, behind a screen looking at various databases and all kinds of information that they pull from the digital environment, or someone who has to read whether or not someone is lying based on whether or not they start to perspire heavily on their upper lip while they're talking. Someone who has managed assets and human intelligence stuff. I'm not saying that Russia doesn't have a digital side of things. I'm not saying that the United States doesn't have human, but there are relative focuses on both sides. And my understanding and expectation is that Russia has had more a focus on that, and that makes them less like chair force type, intelligence officers sitting behind screens looking at whatever they can pick up on the internet, just like our police these days, who, tend to get their man. But it's not because they any longer know how to do investigations. It's because as soon as there's a crime alleged, they go and unlock somebody's telephone and track everywhere they've been. It creates a certain kind of laziness. And so you can agree or disagree with my assumptions, but I'm going to state it clearly. I think that the Russians have more of a focus on human intelligence, and then that creates better intelligence players. I will also add to that Russia has been active in terms of intelligence and the military. And you've got your intelligence services proper, and then you've got your intelligence services associated with their different segments or compartments of the military itself. Russia's been active there forever. They've got very significant human intelligence assets on the ground in Ukraine because it was historically a Russian region. It was historically under Russian or Soviet control. And there is no doubt that those assets remain in some respects. And we're not talking about like one generation of it. Russians doubtless have files on families that go back multiple generations and who those families are related to and how they tended to behave. They can probably look up some player who wields power in X town or vicinity and check all the kind of crap that their grandfather got into. This is a real asset, and this does matter. I see somebody saying high tech is better. Sure, man. High tech is indispensable at this point, but I do not believe it is better. It is an adjunct that has to be there. And the bottom line is that Russia has that too. I'm not saying that they have it to the extent and depth that the United States does, but they've got it for real. Another one, again, agree or disagree, but these are explicitly articulated reasons for why I said Russia is going to win. It has nothing to do with me saying that, the West said this, so I'm going to say that Russia is going to win because I don't agree with the West. Bullshit. The energy angle. The energy angle is still massive. Now, maybe it's all much ado about nothing. Maybe the rising energy prices where they're paying like $6,000 for a month to try to provide electricity to their pub in Britain, maybe that's not really happening. Maybe it's not going to be a big problem this winter. Maybe the gas reserves are going to be sufficient. Maybe everybody's going to stay warm. Maybe there will be no political upheaval. Maybe they won't have problems of any kind as a result of the economic stuff with Russia. But I don't think so. And that's a massive blow. That economic weapon. Think about the sanctions that have been put on Russia and the effects that they seem to have had thus far, which are not insignificant and not non-existent, but they have not succeeded in taking Russia down or even the political regime there down. Now compare that to what is likely to come this winter and ask yourself whether or not what's going to happen to Europe And as a consequence to citizens of European countries, and as a consequence of that, in turn, to regimes in Europe, and whether or not they stand or fall or get replaced, ask yourself whether or not, on the absolute scale of things, ask yourself whether European countries, NATO countries, other than the US, and even the US to some extent, are going to get hurt as badly or worse than Russia is by this. Now, you can agree, you can disagree, but this is a explicitly articulated reason why, at the outset, I believe that Russia would come out of this ahead. There's also the presence of Russian historical enclaves. So let me just go over this, right? This guy Ivan the Heathen is like, no, it doesn't have anything to do with what NATO has done. I know about 2014, but there was always going to be this war, and Russia was always going to cause it. No, I just don't buy that. Yes, Russia was always aware that this war could happen, but you go back to fucking 1991, and you can see the beginning of the steps that led to this, and it wasn't Russia that took them. So this guy, Ivan the Heathen, again, seems intelligent, very well spoken. I'm not saying that I know in any way that he's a shill or something like that. I have no idea. All I can be sure of is that he could be. I don't know that he is. He does sound articulate. He's highly intelligent. He speaks the right languages to translate the material, and he speaks with the right slang to reach the dissident right. However, he's flatly, in my view, wrong. And maybe there's something else I need to see. Charlemagne told me to watch all of it. Still haven't done it yet. But as best I can tell, he's flatly wrong in claiming that, NATO had a little bit to do with it, but this was really Russia. There was always going to be this fight. NATO, didn't play that big a role in it. All you have to do is go over here to this map of the region, right? And 1991, as I've talked about many times, those who've watched my other clips will know about this, right? But I'm just going to go over it again. You've got Kaliningrad, right? And you've got Transnistria right here. This right here is the skinny waist of Europe. If you have territory that can be difficult to defend along here because it opens up to the trans-European plain, right? And you want to find some way to defend it where you're not going to have to, add an extra 2,000 miles of your forces in order to defend it. Well, this is the narrowest spot right here. And from earlier than 1991, but for our purposes, from 1991 forward, you got Kaliningrad here, just so happens to be right at this point to draw a line to make the narrowest division. And you've got Transnistria right here. Must just be a coincidence, right? Must just be a coincidence that since 1991, Russia knew that they were likely to get hit here by a resurgent NATO as the Soviet Union either did collapse from within or appeared to do so. I tend to go with the latter interpretation. Nevertheless, they were unable to assert themselves for quite some time. In fact, from 1991 all the way up to the business with when did the Russian paratroopers, Belgrade, when did that happen? Let's see. God damn it. I pulled up the wrong one. 1999. So for 8 or 9 years, Russia was in a position where it could not stop what was happening in terms of collapsing before eastward expanding NATO. And yet, what did they do knowing, and I've talked about this before, forgive me if you're part of the viewers who have already seen this, but what did they do anticipating that? They made sure they had Kaliningrad. They, from the very first beginning, 1991, they have this Transnistria thing, which was always a breakaway region. That allows them a little beachhead here and a little beachhead here. If they need to, they can try to connect the dots here far enough forward to give themselves some buffer room and to, in theory, have it be the narrowest part of this width of Europe so that they would have to, deploy fewer armies along this line than they would, for example, if they had to do it over here. If I were to just draw, just stretch a piece of string along this border that I'm tracing here with my cursor, and then I was going to draw a string here, and then I pulled this one over here taut, you would find that this might be as much as double the length of the front they would have to defend here. Look at it, what else they've done. They've, we had in the 1850s, we had the Crimean War here, which means this has been a big thing for the West to try to keep Russia bottled up here and control them. Well, look at Georgia. When they tried in 2008 to take the Georgian military highway, which they called South Ossetia. Now, if you get down on it, South Ossetia does not exactly parallel Yermolov's old Transcaucasian military highway, but it's immediately adjacent to it, and there is an alternate route through similar passes right in that area that and I might not have my cursor in just the right spot, so forgive me, I probably don't. It's over here, I believe. But basically, Georgia, under pressure from figures like Soros and other Western money, attempted to roll in and say South Ossetia is their territory and they're going to put their troops there and they're going to move up. It wasn't Ossetia that it was about. It was about this path through the mountains. And this mountain chain is the southern wall of Fortress Russia. And so that was a first attempt that, or one of the many attempts that NATO made to attempt to peel Georgia off and these other countries that were part of their satellites. And we had the business with Abkhazia, and Russia backed them against Georgia. And then Russia said, no, you know what we'll do? We'll just recognize the independence of Abkhazia, even though historically we were enemies, and we'll back them against Georgia. We'll create a frozen conflict there, and then we've got a place where we could put troops if we needed to. So they kept Abkhazia, they kept South Ossetia, they kept this sort of presence with Nagorno-Karabakh and the rest with Armenia and Azerbaijan. They kept Crimea, they kept Transnistria, they kept Kaliningrad up here in the north. So as of 1991, and repeatedly over the years since then, they've kept their positions based upon their strategic needs for defense, and they have they planned it well in advance. So, what is this? What the fuck is this? Only stupid and naive people care about what Russia wants. I don't mind if you're Polish. I don't mind if you disagree with me. I don't mind if you are against Russia, so to speak. But that statement is just stupid. If you're attempting to analyze a conflict, then you have to understand what the needs and motivations of the various players are. So let's put you in timeouts until you learn to say something that isn't just stupid. Anyway, the point is the idea that this is all Russia, and they were always going to do this, and that NATO has nothing to do with it. No, it's the same old fight that's always been there. Russia needs to control. Basically, I was hoping that we could have Jimmy Thomas on here so that he could discuss this. But once you map it out from an operational level, these areas of eastern Ukraine, once you get past this Donbass and this industrial area in the east, it's basically a straight shot, whoop, straight up to Moscow until you basically hit the ring road. So in addition to this wide front kind of aspect, in addition to the fact that it's only up here when you get into the north that you have marshes and other things that act as barriers, all down along and through here, you've got huge open areas, multiple routes that land forces could take to attack Moscow. And Moscow's been ready for it because it's as old as time that these are issues. And it's as old as time that whether we're talking about the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union or the new Commonwealth of Independent States, whether it was Bessarabia before or Moldova now, whether it was, Gdansk and the rest or Kaliningrad or whatever the damn, I guess Gdansk doesn't exactly apply, but what was this called? Königsberg, I believe. No matter what we're calling it on the map, it's the same set of strategic issues that are timeless. And what has NATO been doing? It has been expanding endlessly since then. But do I need to remind you that also Turkey as a NATO proxy has gone in here to try to break things up with Armenia? Likely Turkey, one of the possible candidates for who did it, is Turkish intelligence services and connections with Kazakhstan trying to affect things there. There's just been an endless sequence of provocations. We've also got, Sweden and Finland's accessions to NATO. if I'm remembering that right. Finland's one of them. I think it's, Sweden is the other one, if I'm not mistaken. It's just endlessly pushing in and chiseling in on Russia, and past the points that they consider to be strategic lines that you don't cross, because they'll play hell under under a scenario of full-scale war and mobilization with defending themselves. So, this guy just flat out seems to be full of shit when he's like, oh, NATO has nothing to do with it, or NATO. No, I'm sorry. He didn't say that. He said he doesn't believe NATO is the only reason, and he believes that Russia is the primary cause of this. Also, he's got some other things that I don't really buy, which is, this notion that that Russian propaganda does one thing, and it's just to really say nothing and confuse everyone. There's no real aim to Russian propaganda. They just want to confuse you and the rest. So I haven't seen that. I've seen a very consistent pattern of Russian propaganda. I see them, Russian accounts posting things of, that kind of suggests solidarity between Russian rednecks and Western ones, where they're guys in Russia who like to tailgate and they try to get a hold of big American trucks, and they even wear like trucker hats and, boots, and they look the rest like an American redneck designed to appeal to Southerners. I've seen Russian groups that are, supposedly grassroots clips that just appear, and it's some Russian guy playing Dixie, or guys who are, it turns out later it appeared that one guy was a former communist or whatever, but a guy who's in Ukraine who's saying pro-Russian stuff, but he's got a deep Southern US accent. I've seen a consistent program of Russian propaganda designed to reach nationalist dissident groups in the United States, and particularly Southern whites, in order to bring them over and have them look favorably upon Russia. And I don't think it's an accident that the same very demographic groups make up the lion's share of infantry that fight for the United States military. I haven't seen Russian propaganda designed just to confuse and befuddle so that nobody thinks they can trust anything. I think that's based on some the impressions formed of what that guy, I can't remember his name now, but he was supposed to be like a consigliere for Putin for a long time, who was known. There's one of the, who's the guy who did the Century of the Self or whatever, the director who's done all those documentaries that are half decent. There's one of them where that same guy talked about Russians, Putin's right-hand man, who was known for creating that uncertainty. Yeah, there is an aspect of that is going on. Absolutely. They attempt to create uncertainty so you can't be sure what's going on. Yes, Adam Curtis, thank you. But that's not the only thing that's going on with Russian propaganda. Russian propaganda is enormous, via Telegram, via Twitter, via all of this stuff. Western propaganda is at least as big. But to claim that Russian propaganda is just this one thing, and so if it doesn't look like this, it's not Russian propaganda, just seems silly. Now, I will give him this. I have often wondered about whomever these figures are that backed the Azov battalion, because that's basically just like a gimme for Putin. Creating that group, whatever military size it actually is, I don't know, and nor at this point do I any longer care. But in favor of the idea that Ivan the Heathen puts forth, and that this Taras, whatever his name is, guy puts forth, that Zelensky is actually a puppet of the Russians. Well, I mean, I have wondered about things like the Azov battalion, because that's just basically, it's like custom made for Russian propaganda purposes. The simple existence of that organization is custom made for Russian propaganda purposes. It's like one of the best things. It's a gimme for them. There's also the fact that that all of them who are talking about corruption in the Ukrainian government are absolutely right. It's insanely corrupt. So there could be something going on there where Zelensky does have one foot in the Russian camp and was waiting to do something with it. But against that, I would say you got the long participation of people like Hunter Biden and what's his name, Joe Biden and Burisma and the Victoria Nuland and who's that fat dipshit who likes to show up in his uniforms. I can't remember his name. He's got the twin brother. All those scumbags. The degree to which Ukraine is in Western pockets is huge. I don't doubt that there are also people who are in Russian pockets. And I don't doubt that there are large numbers of people who are in both. So in that respect, I think what Ivan the Heathen is saying and this other Taras guy, still have to watch all of it, that makes sense. And that's something we should really think about. So Charlemagne does us a favor by bringing it in to consider it, because you've got people all over the joint who are taking money from both sides. I do not doubt. And it remains to be seen, which side they have to go to deploy their backup chute, if everything seems to go south suddenly. Yeah, Facile Goose, thank you. The Vindman twins, those dirt bags, cock gobblers. So what else did I want to cover here on him? I think, that's the last thing I wanted to say. And then I'll see if we can take a few questions, and then I'll wrap this up because it's gone on for a long time. Thank you all for hanging. The last thing I will say is that, it's entirely possible that Zelensky is in Russia's pocket and in the West's pocket. And that is because of my crazy harebrained hypothesis, which is just speculation, which I cannot support in any way, but I cannot shake either, which is the idea that behind the scenes, there are the most powerful sort of deep factions in Russia and in the United States that are at this point attempting to crush Europe between them. I mean, it's by their fruits you will know them. If it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it's a duck, right? Everything that's being done in Ukraine is fucking Europe. And with every passing day, it's fucking it more thoroughly. And in particular, fucking Germany. And we saw this happen before when Stalin was outrageously supported by what's his name, by FDR, and the new dealers, right? Even to like having equipment for a heavy water setup sent to them. We talk about Lend-Lease stuff with the trucks that were sent and the weapons that were sent and the rest, but we were also sending whole factories, like all the equipment and all the tooling and all the shit from multiple factories upon factories to help them create their shit. We sent stuff to them at different times in the history of World War II when our own troops and allies needed it, and we sent it to the Russians instead. As far as I can tell, FDR was a kind of crypto commie, and Stalin was his ally. They allied with each other. And Stalin, who later became an ally, at first seemed to be on Germany's side and basically helped set the stage for them to invade Poland and set all this stuff off. And then, for reasons that are explained in many ways, yes, I know that the mustache man attempted to go after Moscow. I don't know. It just seems to me that you could make the argument that Russia and the United States cooperated during World War II in order to smash Europe, and in particular Germany. You may not agree, but it's at least a plausible take on what happened in terms of history. It seems to me at least possible that we should consider that maybe something similar is happening today, because we see the United States and Russia doing things that crush Europe between them, and in particular Germany. And if that's the case, I'm not saying it is. It's wild, insane speculation that cannot be supported in any reasonable sense. But that would be another way to explain Zelensky simultaneously seeming to be a creature of Russia and of the West. So make of that what you will. Now I'm going to take a look and see if there are any final questions. I'll have this last cigarette. If there are some good questions, we may go for a few more minutes. Prism mentions, hello, by the way, Prism, that this can't be separated from the Great Reset. Yeah, it can't. As I've observed many times, build back better doesn't mean anything unless you've first destroyed everything. I would add that the war in the Ukraine, the energy issues, the VAGS issues that cannot be discussed here, the digital identification, the travel controls, the energy shift and the green stuff and the Great Reset cannot be considered separately from the war in Ukraine and all of that. It's all coming together. And if you really smash things properly, then you're in a position to build back better. And it just happens to be a coincidence, I guess, that leaders from Canada to the United States to the United Kingdom and Australia all just seem to use this "do better, build back better" kind of lexicon. Must be a coincidence. What do I know? All right, let's see if we have any final questions here. Particularly constructive criticism of my takes or defense of Ivan the Heathen, because again, I don't know him. He seemed like a very intelligent and articulate guy. I'm not making any claims about him. I just don't know enough yet. So, if anybody wants to back him, I noticed in the chat earlier, somebody said that he's been putting material out there that was considered to be of decent quality since 2014. So again, I don't know one way or another. I don't want to shit on some dude when it may well be that he's a good faith operator and really believes what he's saying. And that's entirely possible. So Kyle Garrity says, what interest would American technocrats have in partitioning Europe with the Russians? I don't think that they would need to partition it. But there are a number of ways that you could take this. Russia simply wants to, I think Russian goals are to maintain its defensive borders, vis-a-vis the different things that I've mentioned, like Kaliningrad and Transnistria and the rest, and having a shorter front to defend, and that kind of thing. And I also think that they want to keep Europe dependent upon them to some extent via energy, because that's one of their defensive postures. I don't think they need to do anything much further with it. They need to continue to sell energy there, because again, the energy aspect is part of the warfare, right? Everything's unrestricted warfare now, and I mean that in the most expansive sense. Those of you who have what is this? The way I pronounce place names is unforgivable. How about I pronounce this? Fuck off. Fuck yourself. So we have an unrestricted warfare going on, and the result of that is that all warfare all the time on all levels and all places. So, it's not just like, economic warfare or propaganda together with, psychological warfare and kinetic warfare. It's unrestricted. It is total. There are no rear areas. There are no ceasefires. There are no non-combatants. It's every aspect of life all the time and in all places. So in that framework, energy and economics is a large part of it. So I don't think they need to partition the Europe with the United States. There are just certain things that they need to maintain. And the United States appears to have some concerns about Europe as well. I don't know what they are yet. And also, this is just one take. I said it was a crazy speculative take, and I can't shake it. But I don't... I'm not saying that that's the case. That's just one of the wilder ones I throw out there in an attempt to have the pieces fit. Somebody asked, do I believe that Russia will take Kiev? No, I don't think so. My belief, it goes up and down now, and I'm like, like, this is a good thing that I should have touched upon. I think the situation now for Russia is very serious. I held at the beginning for the reasons that I gave. I believe that they will end up having a better set of conditions to claim victory than NATO or Ukraine proper or the West in general. So I still think Russia will be victorious in some sense that is more convincing and plausible than the West. I still think that they are going to go for Odessa and to connect with Transnistria. I do believe probably they'll go for Kharkov or Kharkiv, or however you want to say it. I think they're going to have Lugansk, Donetsk, that Donbass area. I think they're going to take Kherson and the rest, keep Crimea. And I think they're going to try to cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea. I still think they're going to try to do that. But I am less, and I still think on balance, that's the greatest likelihood. But I'm less sanguine about their prospects now than I have ever been. Still think at this point they can do that and probably will. But It's serious shit. Ukraine did manage to mobilize enough troops to keep heavy pressure on 2/3 of the front line now for weeks and weeks, and they've got serious salients curving in now around Krasny Liman to encircle it. They've got 3 of them along the Oskol River, if the maps are to be believed. And while they seem to be holding the Ukrainians down in the area of Kherson, those Ukrainians continue to be making small but noteworthy ingress through their lines. Like they still haven't been pushed back to the other side of the Ingulets River. In the area of Bakhmut, yeah, it looks like just constant grinding Russian pressure there is beginning to get them realistically within sight of encircling and taking Bakhmut. And if, you know, some of the tactics and strategy guys are to be believed, that would be a major blow for their position in Donbass. Yeah, probably that's the case. But by the same token, they've been pushing there hard and they've got slow going. So they're mobilizing, but we'll see. Belarus comes in, we'll see. And I don't think it's likely that we'll be glowing in the dark, but the possibility of an actual tactical nuclear strike or one that is a false flag cannot at this point be discounted. But what worries me the most of all is something unforeseen that is done by some 3-letter agency, probably on the Western side, but it could also happen from the Russian side. Like, I don't, just for the record, Putin's not my friend. I don't think the Russians are my friend. But what worries me most is what I can't see, which could be another biological issue related to disease that becomes a pretext to do certain things. I mean, there are all kinds, you know, a major terrorist attack in a Western city. Who knows? Something, you know, breaking out with Iran. I don't know. I do know, however, from the time that has passed recently, that crazy shit has been happening that we never would have expected. And it's one after another after another. And I should also state, for purposes of full disclosure, I am the eater of crow. I was absolutely wrong about what would happen with Trump. And I got on board with the take of people like the Duran early on, thinking that Russia would not invade at all. So, you know, I've been spectacularly wrong in the past. So, you know, make your own judgments, your own assessments. But, you know, these are mine. So let's see here. Is there anything else? Is there anything else in here of significance that I've missed in terms of questions? Let me just scroll up and check. Yeah, I tend to think, you know, the idea of someone openly and explicitly, like something like, you know, Putin coming in and dropping a tactical nuke somewhere in the western regions of Ukraine in order to show that he's serious. I don't see that at all. I mean, if you basically wanted to have a tailor-made example of a pretext for NATO intervention, that's it. Which is why I think that you're seeing it pushed by the Western side. So, you know, we'll see. We'll see. So, yeah, we clearly have a few shills in the audience. There's a certain point about the there's a certain vibe and smell that comments have when you can tell they're just 100% shills. That is not to say that there aren't actually legitimate Ukrainian supporters of Ukraine in the chat who just say what they think. I believe that's true too, but stinks of shillery. Usually when you see the shills, it's the most infantile, you know, tantrumy kind of fucking, you know, mouth puking, you know, feces dribbling. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to have one last look here and see if there is anything else. Hopefully this has been useful to you guys. If nothing else, the main points I want to make are the main points I want to make are about what we saw with this map here. Let me just show you one last time. I think we have to look very closely at Bulgaria. I think we have to look increasingly. I think we have to look at Greece, because we've got this business with Greece and Turkey tension inside NATO. And Greece, I mentioned early at the outset how Apostolic Majesty had been talking about Greek fellow feeling with the Russians, the shared Orthodox background. We have, the Duran with their two-headed eagles. Goes a long way towards explaining why a couple of Greek guys would be taking a positive stance vis-a-vis Russia and showing, despite all their protestations of neutrality, what is a clear pro-Russian stance. Anybody who wants to get just a quick overview of what's been going on with NATO and Greece and Turkey should go over to Prudentialist's channel. He just did a clip on that with Furious Pertinax. But so yeah, you should look at Greece, you should look at Turkey, you should look at Georgia, you should look at Armenia and Azerbaijan, you should look at Bulgaria, Romania, Moldova, especially Transnistria, and we should be looking at Belarus. And the stuff with Latvia and Lithuania and Poland and Kaliningrad is not over yet either. But if you just look at this map, I mean, ask yourself, honestly, just ask yourself, where are these hotspots? If we plotted them, we've got them up here around Kaliningrad. Let's just make a little dot right here, right? And then we've got Belarus, which the EU under pressure was trying to peel off of Russia and create conflict there. So then we've got Belarus. Let's put another dot. We've got Ukraine, which is another dot. We've got Transnistria, we've got Crimea, we've got Abkhazia, we've got South Ossetia, we've got Azerbaijan and Armenia, and we've got Kazakhstan. What do all these things have in common? They're all Western-backed hotspots immediately on Russia's borders. Immediately on Russia's borders. So, I mean, the idea, if anyone tried to advance this notion that this is just crazy Russian aggression, I'm like, well, how come the movement is into Russian territory and has been for 20 or 30 years? And how come all these hotspots are on Russia's immediate borders? Like, imagine if we went over here, and then I'm going to wrap this up, people. Imagine if we went over here and all we heard about was U.S. aggression, and it was all based on hotspots that appeared all along the southern border here and all along the Canadian border and naval engagements right here between Florida and Cuba. And most of them plausibly could be traced back to Russian-backed stuff. If you had all kinds of stuff associated, like if Mexico allied with Russia and Cuba allied with Russia and Canada allied with Russia, and then you had all kinds of conflicts breaking out on the American borders, would you describe that as American aggression? Jogger, please. So that's my take at the moment. Oh, wow, I didn't even show you the map when I was talking about that. I'm a dumbass. Look, I'll say it again. If you had shit breaking up all along this southern border and Mexico was wanting to join the Collective Security Treaty Organization of Russia, and then Cuba was trying to join the Collective Security Treaty Organization of Russia, and all kinds of economic stuff, and you had naval engagements between Cuba and Florida, and you had the stuff on the Mexican border, and it was all militaries of Mexico and Cuba that had allied with Russia and Canada, and there were all these breakouts here along the border and in the Great Lakes and up here by New Brunswick, right? And Canada also had joined the Collective Security Treaty Organization, or wanted to, in short order. And then all this shit broke out on the American borders. Would you explain that as American aggression? Well, jump over here and ask yourself why we've got the tension in Kaliningrad, why we've got the tension with the Baltic states and Estonia, why we have the problems with Transnistria and Ukraine and Crimea and Russia's southern border here and Kazakhstan. That's Russian aggression? That's Russian aggression? Russia's not my friend. Putin's not my friend. But I'm not a fucking idiot. I was born at night, but not last night. Don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is my clip for this evening. Thank you all for joining me. I hope you will go check out Apostolic Majesty. I hope you'll subscribe to Charlemagne's Substack and his channel. I hope you'll check out Prudentialist. I hope you'll go buy my damn books, you salty curs. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So Yeah. Get it, got it good. I'm Semiagog, and I am out.